2022, and the Senate on March 3rd, 2022. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House and Senate orders. Should any technical challenges arise, please advise me, as we may need to suspend a few minutes to ensure all members are able to participate fully. Witnesses should also be aware that translation is available through the globe icon at the bottom of their screen. For our first panel this evening, we have with us by video conference from the Ottawa Police Service, Steve Bell, Interim Chief, and Patricia Ferguson, Acting Deputy Chief. You have 5 minutes for opening remarks. Chief Bell, the floor is yours.
Good evening, and thank you to the chair and the committee members for inviting me here today. My name is Steve Bell, and I'm the Interim Chief of the Ottawa Police Service, and I'm here tonight with Acting Deputy Chief Trish Ferguson. I'm pleased to be here to answer any questions that you may have. As has been said many times, the Freedom Convoy occupation was an unprecedented event in our city's history. Our service has learned many lessons from this experience, and we are fully committed to cooperating with committees and inquiries seeking to do the same. I recently testified before the Public Order Emergency Commission. During my testimony, I outlined the 4 primary ways that the Ottawa Police Service leveraged powers made available to us through the Emergencies Act. The first and most important power conferred upon under the Act was authority to establish an exclusion zone. This enabled us to stop movement into the downtown core and create a more stabilized environment in advance of the operation that successfully and safely cleared the core and restored order in our city. Another key element of the Act was the power to freeze financial accounts. This assisted us and our policing partners, primarily the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, in incentivizing convoy participants to leave voluntarily. Thirdly, the Act removed the requirement for out-of-province and RCMP officers to be sworn in before engaging in policing duties within our jurisdiction. Given the large number of external police officers who assisted our operations, removing the process of swearing in freed up precious time and resources. Finally, the federal emergency declaration facilitated our access to tow trucks, since we were given authority to compel companies to provide tow trucks and drivers to assist in clearing the downtown core. We're committed to continue to learn from the past in order to ensure public safety and community well-being moving forward. Since February, we've made significant changes to our policing and intelligence operations, and we've seen major successes, particularly in the Rolling Thunder event in April, as well as Canada Day this past year. I welcome another opportunity to assist in understanding both what occurred this past winter and how we can prevent such events in the future. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Chief Bell. We'll now move with round of questions, starting with Mr. Motz.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for being here, Deputy Chiefs. I'm intrigued by your belief that the Emergencies Act dealt with 4 main key areas, and I'll get to those in a minute. Now, as I understand it, Chief, you had an operational plan in place, yes?
That is correct.
And that operational plan was in place in advance of the Emergencies Act being invoked?
So I'm going to need to turn that over to Deputy Ferguson.
Just yes or no, but I mean, you had an Emergencies Act. Are you meaning you had an operational plan that was in place prior to the invocation?
That's correct. We had an operational plan that we were continuing to build on that was executed after the Emergencies Act.
And as I undertake it, and when you do an operational plan like that, like I said, it's a moving target. It's flexible. You have to adjust. Which you've done that. Were you confident prior to the invocation of the Emergencies Act that the plan that you had developed was going to be successful in moving the protesters?
So again, I'm going to turn that over to Deputy Chief Ferguson for response.
Just a basic yes or no is fine.
Yes.
So thank you.
We were confident.
So you were confident that operational plan would certainly work. Now, do you believe, Chief Bell, that you had the support and confidence of the Government of Canada in that plan and through the protests?
So I think to execute the plan, I absolutely believe we had the support and confidence, at least at the branches of government we were dealing with. We were integrated with the RCMP and the OPP at that time, and I do absolutely believe we had confidence.
Okay. So did you ever ask the federal government whether they were meeting or going to meet with the protest leaders?
No, that wouldn't have been a question I directly asked.
Would you, in your experience, would you believe that it would be normal for individuals who have a disagreement like this over whatever it might be, in this case, a political disagreement or a mandate disagreement, and they were seeking to have a conversation with government? Do you think it would be beneficial for that to have occurred between government officials and protest leaders?
So I do know that we were actively engaged through our PLT groups in negotiating and having discussions. In terms of what asks were directly made or what responses were made from the federal government, I can't comment on that.
No, I'm not asking. I'm not asking that, Chief. What I'm saying is, do you believe that a normal course of human interaction, actually having interaction rather than calling people names and dividing Canadians on an issue, just to listen and hear them, would that have been beneficial in a circumstance like this?
So as police leaders, we try and negotiate all the time. So
Right.
whether it was beneficial or not, I can't
But
speak
that's
on
the
either
key.
party.
Human nature is pretty key, pretty basic, isn't it? People like to be heard, and I would certainly support that. Now, you didn't ask the government of Canada to invoke the Emergencies Act, did you?
No, we never made a direct request for the invocation of the act.
Okay. Now, do you think that the Emergencies Act was necessary for you to clear out the protesters with your operational plan? And you both indicated that you believe that it was not. Now, I want to push you on the exclusion zone. You said that the Emergencies Act helped you with
Point of order, Madam Chair. And I would like to apologize to my colleague for interrupting his line of questioning, but I understand that members are requested in the House at this time.
Okay. We were actually, thank you very much. We were trying to sort out what was going on. So there is a requirement to be in the House. Apologize to the witnesses. We will suspend.
Hold on.
Oh, pardon me.
It's a quorum call, and under the rules of Parliament, a quorum call does not require committees to cease.
Perhaps anyone else like to comment on that?
Could I request that you suspend for 1 minute so that we can sort
Okay.
this out?
Let's suspend for 2 minutes. Mr. Motz, and we're just making sure we have our witnesses. There we go, Mr. Bell.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I apologize to the witnesses. Chief Bell, you had indicated previously that tonight in your testimony that the Emergencies Act helped you to develop an exclusion zone, and yet you've previously stated that other statutory or common law authorities exist that might have authorized the creation of that exclusion zone without the invocation of the Emergencies Act. Do you still believe that?
So yeah, what I think I've stated in the past is that the Emergencies Act gave us a very stable legal framework in order to create an exclusionary zone that did not put all of the onus on an individualized basis to the officers on the front line to make a determination of whether someone could enter an area or not. The act was
Fair enough.
extremely beneficial.
Fair enough, Chief, and I'm sorry, but I mean, we all know that you can set up an exclusionary zone anywhere. We do it at crime scenes all the time. There was a fence around Parliament Hill. You could, without the Authorities and Emergencies Act, you can set up an exclusionary zone, and we all know you can. But anyway, my time is up. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you. Mr. Nakvi, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Deputy Chief, for being here today. Let's start from what was happening in downtown Ottawa during the 3 weeks period. Would you classify that you had a public order challenge at your hand during the 3 weeks of occupation that was taking place in Ottawa downtown?
Yes, for sure. And I think we openly stated it on many occasions that the activities that were occurring in that area were unlawful and extremely difficult for us to manage as a police service.
And so you said that the activities that take place were unlawful. Would you also categorize them to be unpeaceful as well?
Yes, I would.
And can you share with us, I know you've spoken about this before, the impact of that unlawful, unpeaceful occupation on the residents of downtown core and the businesses that are located in the downtown core?
So we've been actively engaged in working to rebuild public trust with our community members. And the thing that we hear repeatedly, time and time again, is that period of time left them with a lack of feeling of safety and security within their homes. It impacted them as business owners to be able to actually conduct business. It created fear during the time, but also fear within that community, or at least many residents of that community, that has lasted long beyond the end of February.
And would you agree, I think you've said this before, that that impact was disproportional to those who are vulnerable, marginalized, members of the Indigenous community, the 2S LGBTQI plus community, and racialized communities in the downtown core?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. It is that's one of the culturally richest areas of our community, and those were groups that were targeted. Those were groups that were marginalized during this and most deeply affected.
Would you also agree that during that period there were clear signs of hate symbols like Nazi flags, Confederate flags, and other posters and etc. that could be extremely challenging and traumatizing for members of the community who lived in the downtown core?
So what I would say is that there was examples of those. There was investigations conducted around those. It wasn't everywhere all the time, but there was definitely those examples of hate-based symbols that were seen on a regular basis that were reported to us and followed up by us.
Last week, I asked the clerk of our city, Mr. Kanalakis, around the volume of 311 calls during that 3-week period, and he said it almost doubled. Do you have any sense of the volume of 911 calls during that period, during the period of occupation?
So through the chair, I can get you the specific numbers. I know we do have access to those. What I can tell you is that there was an extremely elevated number of calls. Most problematic for us was the number of 911 calls we received that were specifically intended to disrupt our 911 systems.
Thank you for reminding me that. I forgot that there was a concerted effort to choke up the 911 system. That could have been extremely dangerous for the rest of the community in Ottawa. Am I correct?
That is correct. There was calls that did choke up our system. What I think is also important to recognize in that is the hardship that our members suffered through that. There was people on the end of those calls in our communication center that received those that were greatly impacted by their conversations and their interactions with people who were calling in.
And very quickly, I just want to confirm again, and you mentioned this in your opening comments, that the Ottawa Police Service did use the powers that were granted in the Emergencies Act, and it helped you put an end to that occupation.
We did leverage the authorities in the Act and utilize them in ending the occupation, yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. We'll now move to Madame Normandin. You have 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. Chef Bell, I'll start with you. Let's talk about the tow trucks that you were referring to in your opening remarks. From what I gather, Transport Canada at one point during the crisis set out a plan that would have led to clearing some of those trucks without it being necessary to go through these emergency measures. Is that correct?
So I'm unfamiliar with that plan. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I've never heard of that before.
Donc,
So if there is a plan if there was a plan designed, to your knowledge, it was not sent to your police service. Is that correct?
So it was not sent in any area that I would have or did receive.
okay. Est-ce que de votre côté,
From your perspective, were questions asked about possible options to get these trucks away without having to resort to the emergency measures?
Absolutely. What I can tell you is at very early days into this, discussions around how to leverage and access TOTSI Act inquiry, there's been several instances where it's described the great lengths we went to try and access tow trucks. It was identified as one of the key challenges for us. And with the invocation of the act was a barrier that was removed to us.
je comprends que c'est
I understand that's a barrier that was removed, but my question more specifically is this. Did you analyze the option of getting these trucks removed without requiring tow trucks? Were there any legal means that were looked at?
So there was extensive conversations about alternative measures to actually remove trucks. It was considered, absolutely.
Et pourquoi
And why did that not happen if it was considered?
Because by the time we actually executed our plan, the Emergency Act had been invoked, and we were able to access the tow trucks that were necessary under the provisions of that act.
Alors, je comprends.
From what I gather, there were plans that were there that would have potentially meant those trucks could have left without it being required to go through the Emergencies Act to do that. But that was not something that was attempted because the Emergency Measures Act came first.
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question. There was discussion and plans around how we could have alternate means to move vehicles. So there was a range of considerations. Ultimately, the plan that was built was around tow trucks, and the Emergency Acts provided us provisions to actually access those tow trucks.
Je vais reformuler.
Let me reformulate. You had a plan. It wasn't executed. This plan did not involve the Emergency Measures Act, but that plan was not attempted because the Emergencies Measures Act came in before that. So would it be logical to say that you were not yet at the end of your potential resources? You had actually not exhausted all potential measures before the act was invoked?
So the plan that we built ultimately to remove the trucks was solely based around accessing vehicles, tow vehicles. Other smaller operations that had been considered did consider using different means to remove the vehicles, but on the scale and scope of the size of the operation that we were mounting, it was identified that it was necessary to leverage tow vehicles, and with the invocation of the Emergencies Act, any barriers that existed were removed.
Mais je comprends.
From what I gather, there were options that existed that were not attempted before the Emergency Measures Act.
Well, there would be several different options. One of them is the protesters could have driven out of the area on their own and left. We could have looked at accessing different ways to drive the vehicles out. So there are several options. They were just proven to be unrealistic for us to be able to invoke or to utilize in the period that we were doing the large scale operation that we were.
OK. Rapide.
Okay, quickly. I only have 30 seconds left then. You mentioned the frozen accounts that was thanks to the Emergency Measures Act being invoked. When was that first account frozen?
So that's going to be a question. As I indicated, most of those investigations were done by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. It was a tool that they primarily leveraged. So that would be a question better directed to them because I'm unsure of the first date that occurred.
Thank you, Madame. Your time is up. We'll now go to Mr. Green. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. Bell. Mr. Bell, I'm going to put some questions to you in a rather rapid way. I would ask that you try to provide answers in a succinct manner to the best of your ability. And I just want to begin with testimony from the former Chief Slawley, who stated that based on his intelligence, that in the early stages of the procession towards the convoy and the ultimate occupation, that they had estimated that it would only be for a couple of days. It'd be about a weekend. Was that assessment based on information that you would have provided to him, given your responsibilities as gathering intelligence?
So that was information that was widely known through our entire executive and assessments that had been made by our intelligence groups to go through the intelligence report that existed. And it was our assessment that it was predominantly going to be a shorter period of time, predominantly a weekend.
And ultimately, sir, the assessments you would have signed off on, the final assessments as the person in the senior executive responsible for intelligence, is that correct? Yes or no?
So I didn't sign off on any assessments. The information, and to great credit to the Ontario Provincial Police, they did the predominant.
That suffices, sir. I'm going to move on to the next question. On January 29th, the OPS intelligence assessment published by the Commission, on the January 29th intelligence assessment prepared by Chris Kites, Sergeant Chris Kites, there is pretty significant editorialization, in fact, plagiarization by Rex Murphy. I want to give you the opportunity to respond to this. It's quite stark, and I want you to answer, if in your opinion, to what extent the intelligence assessment relied upon in the decisions to allow trucks onto Wellington Street, along with whether or not you felt you actually had the real expertise and resources to accurately and professionally assess the public safety risk.
So the intelligence assessment that you're referring to was actually first authored on or issued on the 28th. What I can tell you is that was an overall threat assessment that was an overarching document. Beyond that, there was continual information sharing, intelligence sharing between
but on that particular document,
and
sir,
our planning team.
On that particular document, sir, respectfully, the last paragraph of page 4 reads like a convoy manifesto. It talks about the struggling of the middle class. It talks about people rising up who otherwise, wouldn't be protesting, and seems to be almost a stark warning about things to come. And my question through you, given the sensitive nature of intelligence, would you not agree that you would have to have unbiased information that is based on actual fact and not the editorialization of people like Rex Murphy in order to make adequate threat assessments? Would you not agree with that basic statement?
So that was one of the pieces that helped contribute to the ultimate threat assessment that went into the operational plan. It wasn't the only and single document that was leveraged.
Okay, so moving on within that assessment, it made reference that persons of interest in some cases had access to firearms. I'm referring to page 9 now. And some persons of interest have made comments on open source that they intend to bring firearms, etc. In at least 2 cases, persons of interest outside of Ottawa and often outside of Ontario, had been met with police who seized firearms in the interest of public safety, where comments about firearms had been made on open source media. So could you verify and extend that you had intelligence that there had in fact been the confiscation of firearms for the intended purpose of continuing on through the convoy to the occupation?
So I can't confirm that because that would have been done as an intelligence update that would feed into this document.
Can you
by other
confirm that it was in your
jurisdictions.
report and you would have read that as a threat assessment?
Well, that was absolutely the threat of firearms and the threat of violence was
Can you
absolutely
confirm,
a
sir,
piece.
that you had intelligence that people had been stopped along the way and their weapons seized?
As you indicated, it is in the intelligence and threat assessment.
Okay, and my last question, the OPP's Provincial Operations Intelligence Bureau, in their interview summary for Superintendent Pat Morris of the Ontario Provincial Police, identified that the Hendon report dated February 9th, that they had become concerned about instances where information about police action became available to protesters. Recently, organizers actually indicated that they had leaks. At what time did you become aware that leaks were being had between the Ottawa Police and convoy organizers?
So what I could tell you is right from the outset of any information that we received during the occupation and beyond, we've initiated investigations. The information that was presented yesterday at the Emergency Act inquiry was net new information to us that we had not yet investigated. And we've already, as of last night, have initiated an internal investigation, and we will be reaching out to Mr. Wilson to get more information so that we can look to follow up on that. We've been really clear through this.
Mr. Bell, Mr. Bell, the time is up. I apologize.
Okay,
Mr.
thank
Green,
you.
can you take the chair?
Yes, Senator, you have 5 minutes and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, both of you, for attending. Chief Bell, I'll address the questions to you. You referred to a plan that was in place as the Emergency Act came into place. Can you tell me, involving all three agencies, can you tell me when that plan was actually finalized and how that sits in relation to the actions and the act coming into place?
So I am going to turn that one over to Deputy Chief Ferguson.
Okay, Deputy, welcome.
Thank you and good evening, Madam Chair. I can tell you that the plan was developed and expanded upon once we had the integrated team set up. And so I think it's fair to say that on and around the 15th of February, that plan was ready for moving forward.
And who was involved in that plan?
So
What
that was the RCMP, the OPP, and Ottawa Police Service. And then we had other players who were working on separate components of the plan, so the public order plan and some of the other traffic plans and MTO plans.
And in that planning stage, what would be the time frame that took to put that plan into place?
Well, there were several iterations. We were trying to evolve with the situation that was unfolding on our streets and trying to determine what powers we would have, what we could leverage, and resources, as you've probably heard, were a major barrier for us. And so the time that it took for members to arrive, we had the cell plan was working solidly to establish how many officers we were going to need and what capacity we were going to be deploying them in.
Okay, and thank you. So for when the Emergencies Act was invoked, how were those tools then worked into the initial plan?
So I think our plan was fairly solid prior to the act being invoked, but I think what it allowed us to do was really to be able to allow officers on the ground the decision-making powers instead of having to look at it on a one-on-one case-by-case basis. That exclusion zone allowed our officers to be able to act confidently in being able to prevent people from entering and really to address the I guess it would be reducing the footprint, not allowing anybody further to come in.
Okay, and when the operation actually took place, Chief Bell, were you in charge for the OPS side? I'm just trying to figure out who played what role.
Yeah, so as of, thank you for that, as of the 15th, I became interim chief and the operation was started to be executed on the 17th.
Okay, and when the Emergency Act was announced, and you started I was watching it. It was clear that you were going to make a move in the next day or two or three. What is your assessment of the impact of those who stayed and those who went? How did the invocation affect those who chose to leave? Was it coincidental, or did the act itself in your view, means some of them decided to move as a result of it?
So, in my assessment, I don't think it's as straight from one point to another. I think as we went along, the Emergencies Act gave us some of the basis of what the plan we executed was. As we began to execute the plan, and as components like the financial restraint of bank accounts came into effect, we then started to see people move. People, and we've heard it through testimony, identified that they now knew that it was over and would move. So I don't think the Emergency Act definitely moved people right away, but it was a key component that ultimately had some people leave the area before there was police intervention.
Okay, so from the time of the act was announced until you moved on the operation, which I commend all agencies on that operation on that particular day, can you tell me how much the crowd had shrunk?
So I wouldn't have an accurate number of how the crowd would have shrunk. What I can tell you is that the vehicle footprint did not shrink during that point. Okay. It was very static at that point. And what it did allow us to do, instead of shrink, we were coming into a weekend, it didn't allow it to grow like it had every other weekend.
Okay. I think I'm getting waved and my time is up. Thank you, Mr. Green. And we'll now move to Senator Carignan. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question has to do with the exclusion zone. Have I understood correctly that based on your testimony, it is the Emergency Measures Act that led to the ability to create this exclusion zone?
So what I indicated is it created a very stable legal framework for us to have an expanded exclusionary zone. There was provisions being put in that would have, on a case-by-case, corner-by-corner basis, leveraged common law that hadn't traditionally been leveraged for that reason, to create the ability for officers to make determinations to exclude people from entering an area, people or vehicles. What the Emergency Act did is it gave a very stable legal framework for us.
But there already is an Emergency Measures Act at the provincial level. And Mayor Watson declared emergency measures. He said, told us last week, that it was symbolic, that order that he issued about an emergency, that it didn't really have any powers behind it. To your mind, the fact that Mayor Watson stated there were emergency measures, do you think that would have led him to potentially being able to create an exclusion zone himself?
No, as Mayor Watson indicated, there is limited abilities or powers or authorities under a municipality declaring a state of emergency. It's predominantly around procurement, and it would not have given us any legal authority to create an exclusion zone like what was created through the Emergency Act.
So, according to you, Mayor Watson's order did not actually create an exclusion zone. That's what you're saying. Do you have legal counsel behind that? Any kind of opinions?
No, just my knowledge, imperfect knowledge of what is allowed under for a municipality to do as they declare an emergency.
Okay. Did you know that Mayor Watson's order as to emergency measures could have allowed him to also seize certain things, confiscate certain things, compel individuals to provide their equipment, including tow trucks? Are you aware of that?
No, I'm not.
Okay. You said there were a number of options that were looked at as to tow trucks. You replied in your answer to the member who asked you these questions, you said you were looking at a number of options. You didn't exactly set out what those options were. Can you tell us exactly what those options were you were looking at?
So there was different options that we looked at. One of them was accessing tow vehicles through private companies. One of them was looking to amass a number of municipally held or government held tow vehicles. That didn't prove to be fruitful for us because there just wasn't enough that we could use. And another was to actually have people drive vehicles out of the area. That was identified to be problematic because some of the vehicles had been disabled in a way that would have made it difficult or impossible to drive them out.
Yep.
Okay. Chief Bell, do you know that as a peace officer you have the power to force a tow truck, compel a tow truck business to tow, and that if it doesn't, you can find it guilty of obstruction?
So I can't find them guilty of obstruction. We could look to...
Non, ça, je sais que ça pour un juge, j'ai quand même 30 ans d'avoir.
I know I know that you need a judge to call that obstructions, but if an individual refuses to cooperate, then that there can be a charge of obstruction when you ask a tow truck company to tow.
So we wouldn't be able under the criminal code to lay a charge against a tow truck company. It would have to be against an individual person, driver or owner. And we didn't get to the point where we ever looked at initiating criminal investigations, ultimately doing the investigation, laying a charge, and then having it go through a court
Vous avez pas songé à
You didn't consider forcing and compelling these...
les chauffeurs?
Senator Carignan, your time is up. I can't tell whether... Senator, your time is up.
Yes.
Senator Cordy, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and welcome, Chief and Deputy Chief. It's been argued that there were difficulties in relationships between the Ottawa Police, and do you agree with this assessment? And if so, did these difficulties slow down the implementation of solutions to deal with the protest?
So I think it's really important to identify that this was a stressful time. Stressful time for everyone in our city, stressful time for our organizations. I do believe that we worked with our partners in a good and increasingly progressive way to get to the ultimate outcome that we had. At the end of the day, we had a very strong integrated planning team, a very strong unified command system that actually allowed us to use resources from across the country to execute the plan.
Was leadership acting in unity? Because we've certainly heard incidents of that the chief and the police board were not working together. Were there problems in that area?
So again, I would go back and I would say this was an extremely stressful time for everyone involved in this. In that, there was always some challenges in people trying to work together to move ahead. I don't believe that ultimately it impacted our progress, but it was a stressful and difficult time.
I'm wondering also, other people have spoken about the tools that were available, and you've said, or I believe you've said, certainly many people have said that the tools were in place, but did organizational and planning difficulties make it more challenging to use the tools that were available?
No, I actually think the tools that were there were heavily leveraged in the plan that we ultimately executed. I think between the tools provided by the province, the tools provided by the federal government in both their emergency acts were utilized for us to successfully execute the plan.
We also heard yesterday that convoy leaders were receiving information about police tactics, about the plans that the police departments, both the Ottawa Police, the provincial police, and even indeed the RCMP, that information was being given to the convoy leaders about what was planned. Did you believe that this was happening, or did you know of situations where this was happening?
So what I can tell you is right from the very early days of the convoy, it was something that we were concerned of. At every turn, as we received information to initiate an investigation, we did. We have engaged in discipline from some of our members as a result of conduct during it, not directly as attributed to the planning that we heard about, more around donating money to the cause. But I can tell you that was net new information through Mr. Wilson to us yesterday. And as I indicated earlier, as of last night, I've already initiated an investigation to follow up on those comments.
Thank you. That was going to be my next question, was whether or not you were going to be doing an internal investigation. So I'm pleased that that's happening. Getting back to the money, and you said that accounts were frozen, but we did hear yesterday that envelopes of money, in fact, were being passed out to people, and significant amounts of money, not $25 or $50, but significant amounts of money. And money that came from programs like Adopt a Trucker, which I had only heard about yesterday. So was this accurate? Did you know about the money being passed out? I think you referenced it earlier in an answer. And was there any attempt to stop the flow of this money?
So I'm unfamiliar with the information around the envelopes being handed around. What I can tell you is one of the things that concerned us in the early days and was identified through intelligence was the crowdsource funding. Initially, the GoFundMe, which we were engaged in conversations to have GoFundMe stop the flow of that money, and then Give, Send, Go, where we actually as a lead agency with the Ministry of the Attorney General initiated a restraint order against that. So at every opportunity we had to investigate the flow of money, we engaged in that.
Thank you very much, and I know my time is up, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Senator Patterson. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. Chief Bell, you've talked about the large problem of the trucks being downtown and the difficulties of moving them out. But I'd like to look at this from a preventive aspect and ask you this. You knew, I think the whole country knew, that the trucks were rolling across the country heading to Ottawa. Does the Ottawa Police Service not have access to large concrete barriers that can be pinned to the roads?
Yes, well, the city does, and we could access those, yes.
And those have been used before to block streets in certain situations?
That is correct.
So I guess my question is, why weren't those put in place in locations like Wellington Street to stop those big trucks from coming into the parliamentary precinct?
Well, what I can say is now through the experience that we had at the end of January and beginning of February, we've taken a very different stance on how we allow vehicular-based demonstrations, protests, or events into that downtown core, and we just do not allow them. I can tell you, up until this occurrence in our city and first across the country, we had never, as a policing organization, not allowed people to come into a downtown core area in vehicles, and we'd facilitated several vehicle-based protests in the past. This was the first experience of this kind for any police agency across the country, and I would say it's dramatically changed how policing agencies look at and manage vehicle-based protests.
Thank you. Now, we heard witnesses from the city of Ottawa in our panel a week ago, and I asked the same question, and the senior city officials said that they, as far as that request or that idea of deploying concrete barriers was concerned, it was the Ottawa Police Service that rejected using the barriers on the grounds they would impede traffic. Do you recall that request and the decision that was made by the Ottawa Police Services not to go along with that idea?
No, I don't recall that request.
Okay, thank you.
We'll now move to 4 minutes, and we start with Mr. Brock.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for your attendance today. So, question now to Acting Chief Bell. To invoke the Emergencies Act requires an emergency that arises from threats to the security of Canada that is so serious to be a national emergency. As you know, Chief Bell, the threats to security of Canada has the same meaning as assigned by Section 2 of the CSIS Act. You, and to a question to the Deputy Chief, there was absolutely, during the entire period of this occupation and thereafter, zero evidence of any espionage or sabotage against Canada. You'd agree with that?
I have no information around that. We conducted no investigations into that.
No evidence of foreign influenced activities within or relating to Canada that were detrimental to the interests of Canada, that were both clandestine or deceptive or involved a threat to any person, correct?
I don't personally have any knowledge of that.
No activities within or relating to Canada directed toward and support of a threat or use of acts of serious violence against persons for the purposes of achieving a political, religious, or ideological objective within Canada, correct? No evidence?
Well, so it depends on, I think that one is more open to debate. We did see acts of violence that occurred during the convoy.
You saw acts of violence which resulted in 4 criminal code charges. There was no serious violence by way of aggravated assault, assault causing bodily harm, attempt murder, or murder. That is serious violence. You're a police officer. I'm a former Crown attorney. You'd agree with me, sir?
We did not lay any of those charges.
Thank you. And lastly, no evidence of any activity directed toward undermining by convert unlawful acts that were intended to the destruction or overthrow by violence of the constitutionally established system of government in Canada. No evidence of that.
We did not investigate or lay any charges in relation to that.
Thank you. My colleague Glenn Motz indicated, and you confirmed, that you did not request the Government of Canada to invoke the Federal Emergencies Act. Federal Emergencies Act, sorry.
That's correct. There was no direct request made from the Ottawa Police Service.
Were you ever consulted by the federal government on its invocation?
That would be a difficult question for me to answer, as I only became the interim chief at the point which the act had been invoked. Okay. Those would have been conversations that would have occurred between former Chief Slowly, if they did occur.
Thank you. Minister of Public Safety, Marco Mendicino, on 13 occasions in the House of Commons, in committee, through the press and media, confirmed that law enforcement asked for the invocation of the Emergencies Act. You'd agree with me, sir, that both statements, your statement that you did not ask the government, and Minister Mendicino's multiple statements that law enforcement asked for it, cannot be accurate and true at the same time, correct?
So I don't know what conversations would have been had between former Chief Slowly and the federal government. What I can say is the Ottawa Police Service never made a direct request for it.
Correct. So my point is, both statements can't be true at the same time. Would you agree with me that Minister Mendicino has lied to Canadians and perpetrated that lie on numerous occasions?
I don't think I can make that statement.
Further, Minister Mendicino indicated that we got advice from our law enforcement that we met the threshold to invoke the Emergencies Act. You will confirm that you did not indicate that, did you?
No, but again, I was not involved in those discussions prior to the invocation of the Act.
Thank you. We'll move to Ms. Bandayan. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy, and thank you, Chief. I would like to begin by recounting a story I did previously in this committee. I was in Ottawa for the 3+ weeks of the occupation, and on several occasions I was walking down the street and ran into OPS officers, and they were often watching either altercations between citizens or merely watching the huge trucks that were blocking all of downtown Ottawa. And on several occasions, I asked them why they were not enforcing the law, including the Highway Safety Act. And I was told on more than one occasion that it was because they had instructions from their higher-ups not to do so. Were those instructions provided by the OPS, by you, Deputy, who was there at the time?
I can tell you that for a large period of time during the first few weeks, it was a very volatile and agitated situation out on the road. And police officers have discretion in any situations where they feel if it will either worsen the situation, make it more violent for people around, or for themselves if they're going to be putting themselves or other members of the public at risk.
Ottawa Police was not enforcing the law.
That's not what I'm saying. We were allowing our officers to exercise discretion and potentially be enforcing the law at a later stage, gathering evidence while they were standing there, taking information on plates, on people around, and collecting evidence in that way. And charges could have been laid later.
The testimony here this evening from both of you has been to the effect that you had a plan that was, and I quote, ready to move forward on February 15th. That is one day after the invocation of the Emergencies Act. And respectfully, what in God's name was the OPS doing for the 3 weeks prior to February 15th, during which our nation's capital was under siege?
I can tell you that after the first weekend, we were situating ourselves with what the situation now was and determining what the best course of action is.
For 3 weeks?
It's no surprise to you, I'm sure, that we were overwhelmed by the amount of people that had arrived in our city, and our staffing levels at that stage were not measured to be able to answer in a way that we finally ended up needing to. So we took all sorts of steps in terms of negotiation with some of the protesters. We took steps to identify where our areas of main concern were, and we evolved and began developing plans at that point in time. For a plan of this size to take place, it takes a number of weeks, and eventually it took 2,200 officers, which we did not have at the ready here in our city to be able to deal with that.
Thank you. And Chief Bell, then you confirm that there was no plan prior to February 15th and prior to your arrival?
No, I don't believe I indicated there was no plan there. I said when I arrived, there was a plan that was built and ready to be executed.
Why wasn't it executed?
But it was executed starting on the 17th.
After the Emergencies Act was invoked. Why wasn't a plan executed prior to the invocation of the Emergencies Act, Chief Bell?
Well, I believe you heard Deputy Ferguson say that as we went through, we were in the process of building plans. We did build plans. We were very clear about our resourcing needs and the needs to bring people in to help us assist.
Was the OPP able to? Did the OPP respond to your resource requests in an effective manner?
Yes, I believe they did as we moved through the process.
I'm sorry
the OPP's been.
Ms. Bendayan, we may get another round. Thank you. And we'll move to Madame Normandin.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to get back to your opening remarks. You pointed to 4 things that the Emergency Measures Act allowed for: this exclusion zone, the option to freeze funds, the suppression, eliminating the swearing in, and also the authority to compel tow trucks. Is that correct? Great. Now, more specifically, on the issue of freezing financial accounts, you mentioned that it was helpful because when the Emergency Measures Act was invoked, people started leaving them by themselves. That was actually one of the effects of the act, and the fact that there was this announcement about freezing assets.
That is correct. I also indicated that most of the work around the freezing of the accounts was done through the coordination of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Parfait, mais vous...
Perfect. You did mention that that was useful, right? I'm just getting back to your own comments.
Est-ce que vous êtes capable de me dire...
Okay, great. Can you tell me to what extent it was not only useful, but required, necessary?
So again, I will revert you to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who were responsible and more active in the financial restraint component. One of the things, because I think it's important to remember, we were part of a unified team, a unified command system at that point. So as I speak moving ahead, I'm speaking of the overall impacts that we saw through the Emergencies Act with all of our partners.
Je vous ramène...
I'd like to get you back to the answer you gave me, actually. To your knowledge, on what date was the first account frozen? You told me that you didn't have that date, correct?
That is correct.
Vous avez...
You mentioned that freezing accounts, or the option to do so, had a deterrent effect on protesters. Can you tell me, on those people that were there in person, how many people were affected by that? As a ratio of the number of protesters, how many of them might have had their accounts frozen for that to be a deterrent?
Again, I don't directly have that information. That was a portion of the plan that was executed largely by the RCMP.
Would it be correct for me to say that when you say that it was helpful, the freezing of accounts, it's really purely speculative because you have no way of knowing, or you don't actually know, how many accounts and how many people were affected by this?
Well, so I think it's information. I know it's information that we received back from the ground from our police liaison team members. I would say that would be corroborated by some of the witness testimony that we're hearing this week at the Emergency Act inquiry, where members who were on the ground, members of the occupation and planning team, have indicated that it did have an impact as well.
Thank you. I will now move to Mr. Green. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I want to redirect on some of the initial conversations of threat assessment. Certainly, we had discussed that weapons had been seized from persons of interest. To your knowledge, how many persons of interest and how many weapons had been seized based on the information reported in your threat assessment?
So I don't have that information.
Okay.
I can.
You recall, of course, in the first couple of weeks of February at Coutts in particular, police officers were feared to be the target of a armed attack on that particular blockade. Are you aware of that?
I am.
And were you updated, and was that included in your threat assessments?
So the information we were gathering was through joint intelligence gathering with all of our national partners as that went on. I think as the occupation unfolded. I think it's important to remember that Coutts occurred and began after Ottawa had been established.
But I also want to reference that in your January 29th intelligence assessment by Sergeant Kites, he has individuals or groups that would potentially pose a threat to the convoy. It's on page 6 of the threat assessment. He lists ISIS. He lists the Islamic State and international threats. And yet there's no reference of the groups associated with Coutts within your own intelligence assessments that were targeting police. I find that incredulous. Could you comment how you would have not had that information included in your threat assessments when on the very next paragraph, sir, you had the threat level at medium within italics, that it had the intent and capability to commit an act of terrorism in Canada? ITAC assesses that a violent act of terrorism could occur. Right there. How do you have the disconnect?
So I don't know that it's a disconnect. As you indicated, the intelligence that you're referencing, the information as a result of the Coutts takedown, was much later than when this intelligence assessment was authored. It was a week or two after that.
Okay, so in your opinion, do you accept that there was a medium threat?
Well, it's not for me to accept. The threat level that's identified is through an integrated terrorist assessment center, and it's something that's determined by our national security experts and provided to us.
Okay, sir. You indicated on March 7th that you were implementing new actions and measures, including continuing internal investigations related to inappropriate police member conduct. Does that include potential leaked information or sympathies that had been uncovered throughout the operational planning with the convoy?
Yeah, as I indicated,
And how senior would that have gotten in your ranks?
As every investigative lead that we were provided, we followed up on. So I can't comment on the investigations as they unfolded. I can let you know that as there was discipline or hearings to be held around them, we did hold those.
Chief, your time is
and-
up. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Green. Senator Carignan, 3 minutes.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is once again for Chief Bell. There was an injunction that was issued by the Superior Court around February 7th upon request of a citizen. I was surprised. It was a citizen that had to ask. There was an injunction application to stop people from honking their horns, which was a complete violation of absolutely every possible municipal bylaw. How did you enforce that injunction, and what were the effects of this injunction?
So I will turn it over to Deputy Chief Ferguson to talk about any efforts that we made in terms of enforcement around the injunction. What I can let you know is that as that injunction was being heard, the Ottawa Police was party to it at the end in terms of the enforcement provisions around it. And as we've heard about before, enforcement was a big challenge for us as we went through this. The injunction did provide further tools, some of which we utilized. But based on the resources, based on the complexity of the scenario that existed within the footprint of the red zone, as we called it, enforcing laws was very challenging and sometimes very dangerous for our members. But I can turn it over to Deputy Ferguson if there's any further enforcement measures that we did take.
Thank you, Chief. I think it was a tool that was used when it was safe to do so, and the increased fines certainly were something that I believe was helpful to our members. When the injunction was passed, we did see on the ground a decrease in the amount of honking that was going on. So there did seem to be a little bit more, I would say, moderation in the behavior of the truckers as a result.
Comment expliquer que
I wonder why the city of Ottawa asked for the injunction 13, 14 days after. Actually, it was February 7th or 8th that a citizen asked for this. You did not. The member is inaudible and the screen is frozen. Supporting those injunctions? Question incomprehensible.
Green froze. Can you repeat your question? We've stopped your time.
Oui. Parfait. Je m'excuse.
Apologies. How come it took the City of Ottawa so long to ask for an injunction itself?
La citoyenne avait eu un effet.
The citizen's injunction was effective. It was horrible, this honking, etc. Why did it require a citizen actually asking for an injunction on that date? Why did the City of Ottawa decide to ask for this kind of injunction on the 13th?
So I know, as the chief indicated, we were part of some conversations around injunctions and what the benefits of such a tool would have. Ultimately, it was a decision by the City of Ottawa as to whether they were going to seek that or not. And obviously, they did several days after our young lady received hers.
Carignan, your time is
Est-ce
up.
que vous aviez un plan?
Did you have a plan?
Time is up. And if Mr. Green could take the chair, I'll do the next question.
Got it.
Thank
It's
you
the
very
committee cookies. They get me every time. Okay. Madam Senator, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Chief Bell, I have 3 minutes here, and there's a couple of things I'd like to get clear, if I may. First of all, the province declared an emergency. What effect did that have, or what assistance would that have provided to you?
So the EMPCA that was declared by the province gave tools around commercial vehicles, movement of vehicles into the city or in towards protests. So it was one of the layers and building blocks that we utilized in our plan.
Okay, but from the perspective of how did it impact the occupation itself? Can you tell me whether or not it flagged? Did people leave? I'm trying to get to the point of whether or not these layers, as you call them, had any effect.
So, well, absolutely. What I think one of the key things that we were trying to manage at the time was the influx that we continually saw of people into the downtown core. The MPCA specifically gave abilities to deter or divert people from coming into the downtown core, to arrest them if their intention was to come into our area. So although it didn't actually help remove them, one of the key struggles we had was creating a stable and safe environment so we could execute the large plan that you saw.
I understand. And a gentleman by the name of Dean French initiated some negotiations, according to the mayor's testimony last week. Did you, or are you aware if any of your members were involved in those negotiations, and what was the intent of those?
So our members were not directly involved in any of those negotiations, to my knowledge. I believe there was an initial introduction that was made between our police liaison team members through the city to city manager Steve Kanalakis and members, organizers of the convoy, but we weren't directly involved in any interactions with Mr. French.
So whatever Mr. French, whatever his instructions were, that you had no consultation or input into those instructions?
That's correct. We were not involved in those negotiations.
Okay, and can you tell me from an intelligence perspective what your concerns may have been with counter-protests, particularly the residents who were, I think, quite clearly getting at the end of their rope?
So initially, we didn't have concerns with counter-protests. The people that live in Ottawa are very used to demonstrations and protests.
Not like this one, though.
No, absolutely not like this one. What we were concerned about as it progressed was the intervention of citizens with members of the occupation as they moved around the city, and that was very concerning to us.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, colleagues, we have, I think, enough time to do one more round. If we're agreeable, we'll start that with Mr. Motts. Just to be clear, we'll go Mr. Motts and Mr. Vrani for 4 minutes each. And then Madame Normanton, Mr. Green, and our Senator Cordy and Senator Patterson, you will each have 3 minutes. We'll start with Mr. Motts, 4 minutes.
How did you get that going? Thank you very much, Chair. Chief, I just want to take you back to a comment you had made about the exclusion zone and how the Act, the Emergencies Act, was the only, the only tool you had to invoke that, and yet a mere 3 hours after the Emergencies Act was rescinded by the government, the Ottawa Police Service found other authorizations to bar people from the downtown, because you put out a bulletin for public safety interests that you are keeping an area that used to be known as the secure area downtown was no longer accessible to the public. So I just wanted to ensure that and remind you that there are other authorities that you could have used for exclusion zones. Now, you had indicated, sir, that you had a plan, you had an ops plan in place, and that you required, and I think Deputy Ferguson said the same thing, that you required manpower, you required resources. When did the Ottawa Police Service ask for those resources? And yeah, I know that Chief Slowly probably asked for them early on, but you would know that. And who did you ask?
So to start to the first part, I don't believe I ever stated that it was the only tool. What I said was it created a very stable legal framework for us to be able to enact.
Right. Yeah, I remember what you said. What I'm saying is I'm on point with another issue. You invoked another authority to keep people out of the downtown a mere 3 hours afterwards. That's irrevocable. But so how many officers did you ask for? When did you ask for them? And who did you ask for them?
So I'm going to turn that over to Deputy Chief Ferguson.
So thank you. For the first weekend, we had a number of public order units that were here in town assisting us. And then beyond that was on an ongoing basis, there was a very public request for 1,800 officers that I think you saw our chief declare at the Police Service Board meeting.
Right. So the impression that's left is that the invocation of the Emergencies Act was necessary to swear in these individuals. We all know in circumstances like you were facing as a police service, you could have had 500 officers in a room and you could have sworn them in all at once. So I mean, the Emergencies Act was not necessary. Other agencies have done that in the past. So, Chief, I wanted to ask you. Now, we were led to believe that in the early stages, especially during a majority of the blockade here in downtown, the protest, that there was less crime in the affected blockaded area than you're normally used to. Is that, I mean, in fact, significantly less crime. Is there any truth to that, yes or no?
So I would like to go back to the comment that was made around the swearing in.
Well, you know, I asked the question, yes or no, is there more or less crime in the downtown core during the area where the blockade was?
So I don't have the actual statistics for you, but I can provide those for you.
But you know there's less crime?
No, I do not know there was less crime.
Okay. Well, it was reported widely that there was a lot less crime in the downtown area. Now, given your experience, Chief, you know that there are extremists who would attach themselves to protests to leverage that protest for their own nefarious purpose. Is that correct?
That it can happen and is correct, yes.
Right. And there's some evidence to suggest that, not some evidence, in fact, there is significant evidence to suggest that that's exactly what happened at Coutts, confirmed by the RCMP, and also the potential here in Ottawa. Is that correct?
I'm not familiar with with the information around Coutts. I can tell you there were fringe elements involved in the protests in Ottawa, but I can also tell you there was a large number of people involved in occupying our streets engaged in illegal activities.
Mr. Mott, your time is up. I'll move to Mr. Varani.
Thank you. And just with respect to Coutts, I just want to make it clear that, and you may or may not be familiar with this, Mr. Bell, but at least four conspiracy to commit murder charges were laid at Coutts. Are you aware of that? At Coutts, Alberta?
No, I'm not aware of the charges that were made there.
There's something called an Ontario Provincial Police Operational Intelligence Report that I'm looking at, which is prepared on February 14th by the OPP. I think they consulted with you in preparing these types of reports and shared them with you. Is that fair?
So I'm sorry, sir, but I missed the very beginning.
There's something called an Operational Intelligence Report by the OPP dated February 14th that was prepared in consultation with you, and I presume they shared this information with you because it references OPS information. Is that
so? I'm not familiar immediately with the exact document you're speaking of.
Okay, so I'm going to put to you a couple of things, and you can tell me whether this sounds correct from your observations as you observe them as in your role with the OPS. But they talked about sort of some of the objectives of the various people that were on the ground blockading. So their objectives were, quote, an intent to pressure the federal government into repealing restrictions and/or compelling Prime Minister Trudeau to resign. On another point on page 18 of this document, it says they appear to have a vested interest in accomplishing a change of government. On page 22, it talks about a speaker from Quebec used very powerful anti-government rhetoric, talking about overthrowing the present government and having a party of citizens take over. The document goes on. There's multiple references to, quote, "We will be the new government," end quote. "We will just take the power and share it together." That's a continuation of the quote. At the very end of this document, it concludes that the first and foremost barrier to preventing a resolution arises from the primary objectives of the group, which include the dissolution of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government. Does that sound familiar to you in terms of the observations you and your personnel observed on the ground as the OPS trying to deal with this blockade, that this overthrow rhetoric was being used by people that are involved in the blockade?
So again, what I'll say is there was many different components to the occupation, many different people involved in it. Those were comments that could have been heard, but there was also commentary around mandate removals. There was commentary around the World Economic Forum. So there was many different agendas that presented themselves there. You captured some of the sentiment, but I wouldn't say that it was overriding or that there was one voice and that was what the voice was capturing.
Okay, and let's talk about sort of you, Mr. Nuckry talked to you about misleading police calls with misleading the police with attempted obstruction of the 911 vehicle. Are you also aware that children were being used and actively deployed as a method of blocking police activity and impeding police arrests?
So I am well aware that there was children who were in the vicinity and were in actually the red zone. In terms of the activities you're directly talking about, we didn't have any evidence of that, and there was no criminal charges laid around that.
Right, and criminal charges weren't laid because there were times when your OPS officers went in to try and lay charges, and they were actually swarmed or surrounded by blockaders. Is that correct?
That is correct, but it was never in relation to the safety of a child.
Okay, and what you indicated in earlier testimony today is that the Emergencies Act, when it had the mere threat of freezing accounts, that actually prompted individuals to leave on their own volition. That's right?
That is correct. That's
avoiding any necessity of a physical confrontation between your officers and the blockaders. That's correct?
That in not a large scale, but that is one of the impacts that we did see.
And avoiding a confrontation can avoid possible violence from erupting that arises from the confrontation. Is that fair?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Varani. We'll now move to Madame Normandin, please.
Merci encore une fois, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you once again, Madam Chair. Chief Bell, I'd like to get back to something you mentioned regarding the tow trucks. You said that the Emergency Measures Act was useful because it meant you could mobilize enough tow trucks. Then the alternative plan that had been considered, that the other plan would have been to take the tow trucks the City of Ottawa had in its possession, but that there weren't enough of those. Did I understand you correctly?
No, it was more around optioning. I was asked, what are some of the options you considered? Trying to amass local assets through our municipal government was one of them, and it just didn't meet the number that we needed in order to move the occupation out.
Est-ce que vous êtes capable?
Can you tell me what that number is that you were able to mobilize?
I don't actually have that number for you.
Est-ce que vous êtes capable?
Would you be able to tell me how many tow trucks were required once the operation began?
I'm going to turn that over to Deputy Chief Ferguson.
It would be strictly from memory here, but I think we were looking at somewhere in the half a dozen to 15 or so tow trucks. It was the heavy tows that we were lacking in numbers for the city.
Okay. Donc, je reviens quand.
So let me get back to what you mentioned. You said it was impossible to have enough tow trucks, at least based on the city's resources. You could subcontract. You couldn't tell me how many, but you're able to tell me that it was insufficient.
Well, I don't know if it's 1, 2, or 3 resort trucks that we had accessed. I believe that there was discussion around it through City Manager Steve Kanalakis last week in terms of the exact number, but it fell far short of the number that we were going to need to access in order to be able to mobilize the plan that had been put together to go and ultimately remove all of the protesters.
Are there resources, or were there resources outside of the City of Ottawa, or did you just focus on the City of Ottawa?
No, I can tell you we, as part of the planning, right from the early days, we worked very hard to try and access the resources around tow trucks that we needed or look at alternative plans. And ultimately, we weren't able to find the numbers or alternative means to move them. It came down to, in order for us to execute the plan, we were going to need to have the number of tow trucks that Deputy Chief Ferguson mentioned.
So quickly, you were trying really hard, but you were unable to find these 12 tow trucks.
Time
We
is
were
up.
working.
Mr. Green, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. Bell. Mr. Bell, can you just briefly state who was actively involved in the Project Hendon?
So Project Hendon is primarily is run by the Ontario Provincial
Sorry,
Police.
from the OPS, who would have reported to you that would have had access to the Hendon reports?
So the Hendon reports were shared widely within our organization. They were actually put into our intelligence unit, into our planning team, and it was reported up. Information was reported up through our chain of command.
There are reports that have been disseminated through the Public Order Emergency Commission that Deputy Ferguson had not been given access to these reports until a week after the convoy had started. Is that correct, Deputy Ferguson, that you didn't have in the onset access to these reports? And if so, why do you think that is?
That is correct. And traditionally, intelligence has been tightly held in organizations to go to people who that's their designated job.
And so, the interview with Superintendent Pat Morrison for the Provincial Operations Intelligence Bureau talks about a failure in utilizing intelligence in operational preparation, decision-making, and proactive planning. And in fact, goes on to state that it appeared that people didn't understand the gravity, that OPS members participating in the Hendon calls, it wasn't apparent to them that they understood the gravity of the situation by January 21st. However, as time progressed, their grasp and factual questions became more evident. So up until that, is it fair to say that your intelligence analysts that were participating with the Hendon calls perhaps underestimated what was coming their way?
I think we all continued to grow in our knowledge and understanding of what was going to occur.
That wasn't the question, sir.
Nope.
Would you agree with the assessment that there is a failure in intelligence analyst analysis and a significant gap between that analysis and the operational planning leading up to the convoy?
No, I wouldn't agree with that because I think there's many pieces within the intelligence that are very relevant, not within the intelligence, that's extremely relevant.
So let's talk about the relevance of those pieces within the senior leadership team. There has been testimony here that there had been some friction on the senior management team. Did personal relationships get in the way of proper operational planning in the early days of the occupation? I'm going to put that question to Deputy Ferguson.
Yeah, I could say in the early days it did not.
What about in the later days?
As people got more stressed and the situation was evolving, I think the chief's already mentioned that these were very stressful times. We were not
Did you have
all at our
access
best.
to all the information and support that you needed to have an operational plan? Or was the gap between intelligence analysis and operation a continued obstacle for you?
No, as we progressed and realized there were Hendon reports at that stage, of course, though, that our city was full of truckers and we were overwhelmed.
So it was at that point too late?
Your time is up.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'll move to Senator Cordy to be followed by Senator Patterson. Senator Cordy, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. Chief, you said earlier that the Emergencies Act gave a stable framework to police. So I guess my question is, without the Emergency Act, would the occupation have continued to go on for a period of time?
It's a very difficult question to answer because we relied on the frameworks that were provided to us. We were continuing to develop a plan. We would have executed a plan that would have been different than the one that we ultimately did under the Emergency Act. So I can't answer the question about what would have happened in the absence of it because it existed and it was utilized within our planning process and execution of our plan.
And I understand the hypotheticals are often challenging, but you did say, and you stand by it, that it was certainly helpful to provide a better framework to the police in dealing with the situation.
Yes, I do.
Thank you very much for that. I'm also earlier questions were asked about the threat assessment. So could you tell us how many and what types of weapons were seized by the police during the occupation?
I'm going to turn that one over to Deputy Chief Ferguson.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. I can tell you that there's a weapon can be many things. So there's been focus on guns in most of these conversations, but a weapon can be a knife, it can be a tire iron, it can be a number of different things. In terms of charges that we laid, we had an assault of a peace or public officer with a weapon. We had intimidations with weapons. We had carry concealed weapon charges. We had carry weapon to a public meeting charge laid. So there were a number of different offenses involving weapons. But in terms of the amount of sort of guns, if that's what people are focusing on, I don't have a solid number on that. There were threats or intimations that guns were in vehicles, as we've already heard discussed this evening. We did not search every vehicle that we cleared, as we had to move through the city fairly methodically and quickly for the safety of our officers and everyone involved. Many of those vehicles were not searched, and so such we don't know if there really was, if there were guns in them or not.
What types of weapons were you seeing, or did you hear about?
Well, all manner. A weapon is any object that can be used in to threaten or assault somebody with. So knives, I think, tools, tire irons, those types of things were in the mix.
Your time is up.
Thank you. It does go by.
Senator Patterson has passed on his questions, and so let me take this opportunity to thank Acting Chief Bell and Deputy Ferguson for joining us this evening. It's very much appreciated. Colleagues, we will take a 5-minute break, and then we will move to our representatives from the OPP. We're suspended.
Thank you very much.
Second panel this evening, we have with us from the Ontario Provincial Police, Commissioner Thomas Carrick and Deputy Commissioner Chris Harkins. Welcome to you both. Commissioner Creek, you have 5 minutes for opening comments, and you can go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, Joint Chairs, Vice Chairs, and committee members. I'm joined here today by Ontario Provincial Police Deputy Commissioner of Field Operations, Chris Harkins. Under the Ontario Police Services Act, the OPP has a unique dual mandate, providing frontline policing services to 330 municipalities across the province through 5 regional commands, each of which is led by a chief superintendent, plus a highway safety division. We're also responsible for providing various provincial services through our investigations and organized crime section, our traffic safety and operational support section, and a variety of other specialties. As well, we provide assistance and or specialized support to municipal police services upon request, and year to date, we have satisfied over 230 such requests. As it relates to the Freedom Convoy and the associated illegal blockades in the City of Ottawa, the OPP's Provincial Operation Intelligence Bureau commenced reporting to our policing partners on January the 13th, 2022. As of January 22nd, daily intelligence reports focused on the convoy headed to Ottawa and the anticipated protest movements across the province. We shared this with our policing partners. The intelligence reporting was received by more than 35 Canadian law enforcement and security agencies. As the convoy crossed over the Manitoba-Ontario border and traveled across the province until it arrived in Ottawa on January the 28th, OPP officers professionally fulfilled their duties without incident. In support of the Ottawa Police Service throughout the occupation, an increasing number of OPP officers and specialized resources from various services became engaged, ultimately contributing to an integrated plan and the establishment of a unified command. Simultaneously, our members responded to many other convoys and demonstrations that consistently and repeatedly emerged in communities across Ontario, including but not limited to critical blockades of the Ambassador Bridge, the blockade of Highway 402, multiple other attempts to block Canada-U.S. land border crossings, and demonstrations that posed a risk to the area of the Ontario legislature. In addition, from one day to the next, the convoy entered Ontario, and we were responsive to the requests from assistance from other municipal police services. This was a provincial and national emergency that garnered international attention. In response, the OPP and more than 20 other police services from across the country worked collaboratively to address the public order emergencies that were unmatched in recent history. Protests and demonstrations are often complex in nature. The role of the police remains that of protecting the public, upholding the law, and keeping the peace. The Province of Ontario's Critical Infrastructure and Highways Regulation under the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act was an effective supplementary tool that assisted with protecting critical infrastructure and ensuring the continuous and safe delivery of essential goods and services. The Government of Canada provided additional tools in the measures enacted under the Emergencies Act that assisted with preventing a surge in protest participants, protecting children from exposure to the occupation, and enabling the assistance of service providers and providing them with indemnification and restricting access to funding sources of the illegal occupation by temporarily freezing accounts. As the committee is well aware, in addition to the critical events experienced in Ontario, the illegal occupation in Ottawa was accompanied by numerous other high-risk Freedom Convoy-related protests and blockades across Canada. The OPP worked collaboratively with the Ottawa Police Service, the RCMP, and other police partners to develop a sustainable, integrated operational plan that was informed by effective practices from other high-risk critical events, available police resources, along with other concurrent and emerging operational requirements in a number of police jurisdictions. Sufficiently trained public order officers were amassed from throughout Canada and deployed in an integrated, strategic, measured manner over the course of 2 days, which resulted in the collapse of the occupation. This situation and the associated events simultaneously taking place across Canada required unprecedented national collaboration to prevent injury, preserve life, and protect critical infrastructure. As the Commissioner of the OPP, I'm extremely proud of the remarkable professionalism and dedication of the officers deployed to Ottawa and the other high-risk events simultaneously occurring across this province. Despite all of the challenges, while the entire nation watched live, our officers and those from a multitude of other Canadian police services remained committed to their roles and responsibilities and represented the entire policing profession with the utmost professionalism, discipline, and competence. Thank you, merci, make wedge, for allowing us to join you here this evening.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. And we'll now start our round of questions. We'll start with Mr. Brock.
Thank you,
5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to both witnesses for physically attending today at our committee. Much appreciated. Question to Commissioner. Commissioner, you recently attended the commission headed up by Justice Rouleau, and you swore to tell the truth. Remember that?
Sir, yes.
And in the course of several lawyers asking you questions, you confirmed that at no point in time did you or any member of your organization request the Government of Canada to invoke the Emergencies Act. And you accept that particular statement today here at committee, correct?
Yes, sir, I do.
Minister Mendocino, Minister for Public Safety, on 13 occasions in the House of Commons, at various committees, during media reports, to the press, television, indicated that law enforcement, including the OPP, specifically asked for the invocation of the Emergencies Act. Now, both statements can't be true. You'd agree with me that someone is lying.
Well, I can.
And you're not lying, sir.
I
so
am not, sir.
You would agree with me, Minister Mendocino is lying to Canadians.
Well, I can tell you that I am telling you the absolute truth, sir. At no point did I provide or request that the Emergencies Act be invoked.
He perpetuated this lie by indicating that not only did you request it, that you got advice or he received advice either from you or a member of your legal team that the Government of Canada had met the threshold to invoke the Emergencies Act. And that you disagree with as well, correct?
I did not provide any advice of that nature, nor am I aware of anyone from my legal team providing such advice.
Right. Again, Minister Mendocino deliberately misled and lied to Canadians when he indicated at committee and the House of Commons that people in Ottawa, in and around the area of the protests, were subjected to threats of rape, and they were supported by charges. Again, to your knowledge, no one was ever charged with rape itself or sexual assault or any threats of that nature, correct?
I am not aware of anyone being charged with sexual assault, but those level of detail I would not necessarily be aware of and would have to come rightfully from the Ottawa Police Service.
Thank you. Now, on the issue of the invocation of the Act, were you ever consulted by the government at any point in time regarding the mechanics and the tools available to the Act?
No, I was not, sir.
Did the OPP undertake any analysis of whether the legal criteria for invoking the Act had been met?
I wouldn't say that the OPP undertook any legal analysis. When the tools were afforded to us, we had our legal department review it and provide us advice as to how we could use those tools and how they would work in concert with the tools available to us through the EMCPA and the other authorities that were also available to us.
Thank you. How many charges did the OPP actually lay under the emergency measures regulations or the order itself?
I'm not aware of the OPP laying any such charges.
Thank you. Now, I understand that on the issue of the invocation of the Act, you had, prior to the Act being enacted, invoked, you weren't paying attention to the Act itself. You weren't seeking out information regarding the Act. You had no pre-warnings, no heads up, no consultation. You learned of it as it was happening.
Save and accept the conversation I had with Commissioner Lucky where she advised me that the federal government was considering it. That was many days prior to, but there was no advance notice, no heads up, no opportunity to review it. That's correct.
Yes, and that conversation with Commissioner Lucky took place on February the 5th, correct?
That is correct, yes, sir.
And you'd agree with Commissioner Lucky in an email that she sent to Mike Jones, a staffer to the government on the late evening of February the 13th, where she indicates that she's of the view that the RCMP have not exhausted all available tools that are already available through existing legislation. There are instances where charges could be laid under existing authorities for various criminal code offenses. The Ontario Provincial Emergencies Act just enacted will also help in providing additional deterrent tools to our existing toolbox. You agreed with that sentiment as well, correct?
I do, yes.
And on the issue of...
But you will have 5 more minutes coming round next round.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move to Mr. Vrani, 5 minutes.
Thank you. And, I'm going to proceed at somewhat of a brisk pace. Thank you, Mr. Creek, for being here. Really appreciate your time. I wanted to talk to you first about the risk assessment, and I'm looking at a document that's an OPP operational intelligence report, and it's dated February 14th. It's the type of report that you said in your opening was being generated on a daily basis, right? And what it talks about here is it talks about things such as threats that arose, and I'm just going to put to you some of the statements that are here, and just ask you for your comment. So, on February 5th. There was a report that there was a plan to bomb Parliament via the tunnel system. RCMP INSET is investigating. Do you recollect that kind of threat and seeing that kind of threat inserted in these reports?
I do recollect seeing those types of threats referred to in various Hendon reports, but in fairness, I can't say if that is word for word correct, but I have no reason to dispute it with you having the Hendon report in front of you.
Okay, and I've got the report also says that there was incidents of weapons being amassed. So on the same report at page 20, it talks about CIG received information that an individual may be supplying weapons to protesters. CIG is continuing to investigate. CIG is what, Mr. Carrick?
Without seeing the report, I can't say what CIG is,
okay,
sorry.
You're not familiar with that acronym?
No.
It also talks about there's a threat where an individual, now I'm on page 27 of this report, it says, quote, if any violence is perpetrated against those protesters by the government or local police, it's a call to arms for all of us freedom fighters to come together and to go where we're needed. Drop everything and offer your support. Do you recollect seeing that kind of material in these types of reports?
I do recollect seeing those types of statements stated in the Hendon reports, yes.
Okay, and there's another one that I want to take you to because what it says here is that I'm on page 21 of the report, and it says the background of this posting appears to be the OPS Instagram page, so that's the Ottawa Police Service, with a blue bubble with the following text, quote, Just remember, we have more people, more guns, better armor, and we are your owners. You will be hanging alongside Trudeau and the many others that you have shown that have shown their treasonous hand. We aren't scared of you. You need us. We do not need you. Even just hearing that, let alone reading this in a situational report, how would that make you respond in terms of your work in law enforcement, in terms of on behalf of the OPP, when rhetoric like this is being posted by the blockaders?
It's an obvious concern for us, and it would require further analysis through intelligence, potentially further investigation, and certainly the dissemination of that information to the police service of jurisdiction. All of the things that you have cited were a concern to law enforcement, and in particular to the OPP.
And we have, from information that's been submitted to the Commission, we have information that 533 charges were laid, including a large number of weapons charges by the OPS. Are you familiar with that?
I am familiar with statistics that have been cited. I can't say whether that is accurate or not.
And at the Commission, we've also heard evidence from some of the witnesses who have come before the Commission of Inquiry that have said basically this was just a peaceful, sort of almost fun type of protest. How do you react to that in light of what I've just read to you and in light of the charges that were laid?
Well, over and above what you've read to me and the citing of the charges that have been laid, it was not a peaceful protest. It was a unlawful demonstration. It turned into an occupation, and it was a significant challenge for law enforcement.
And are you aware in this report, I took I'm not sure if you listened to the previous testimony, but I took Interim Chief Bell to some of the instances where people used the rhetoric of overthrow of government, dissolution of government, ending Trudeau's reign of power, etc. Are you aware of those kinds of sentiments also being uttered by people who are participating in the blockade?
I am aware of those types of sentiments being reported in the Hendon reports. Yes, I am.
Okay, and I want to take you to something that's quite important, which relates to Diagolon. We know that the Diagolon symbol, which is an ideologically motivated extremist violence group, was found along with an arms cache at Coutts, Alberta. But we also have evidence in this document on page 5, which says the ideological group Diagolon, which advances accelerationist rhetoric towards government collapse. Diagolon appears to have an audience with the convoy, with some members having traveled from BC to Ottawa. Can you comment upon the presence of Diagolon in the Ottawa blockade?
I would not be in a position to provide you with specific evidence in relation to their presence within the Ottawa blockade. All of the information that I would have access to is what's contained in the Hendon report. That further evidence would have to come from Superintendent Pat Morris or an actual intelligence operator.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Varani. Now we'll move to Madame Normandin.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Garrigue, for your testimony. Much appreciated. I'd like you to perhaps detail what exactly happened when you found out that the Emergency Measures Act was going to be invoked. I understand you had a conversation with Commissioner Lucki on or around February 5th, where she mentioned that it could be used. But at what point specifically did you know it would indeed be invoked by the government?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I did not know ahead of time that the Emergencies Act was going to be invoked. It was only after it was invoked and that information was made public that I became aware of it. That caused our team to have to revisit the operational plan that they had in place and consider the new tools that were afforded to them in the Emergencies Act.
I'd like to hear you speak to the plans you already had that you were considering and that you wanted to implement. Could you give us a bit more detail about that? What did it look like over what time frame? The sort of what's the window within which that plan would have been implemented? What did that look like?
So the plan was ready to go on February the 13th. There were still some obstacles that we had to overcome before that plan could be operationalized, but was ready to be operationalized on February the 15th. So the planning team had to revisit the plan and ensure that the tools that were now available to them were considered and where and when appropriate that they would be utilized.
You just mentioned that there were a few issues that had to be addressed for the plan to be able to work. Was the Emergency Measures Act required for that to happen, or did you have other options?
The Emergencies Act wasn't specifically required for us to operationalize the plan from that period between February 13th to 15th. What the Emergencies Act did do, how it did assist police, I believe. So there was a constant struggle with providing towing services. So we did have a number of tow trucks identified that were willing to assist. There were up to 35 tow trucks, I believe, through 7 to 9 different companies. But those tow operators were seeking indemnification. So we were in the process of an emergency procurement process through the province to provide that level of indemnification. The Emergencies Act enabled us to be able to escalate that indemnification and provide that to the tow truck operators. Although not part of the operational plan, the Emergencies Act also provided the opportunity for police to cut off access to funding sources, which made the occupation less sustainable. And certainly we were able to leverage the messaging around restricted zones and restricting children into those zones. Although there were common law and other legal authorities to restrict attendance, it enabled police to strengthen that messaging with the Emergencies Act.
Thank you very much. I'd like to get back to the issue of the tow trucks because you're mentioning that. Am I right to understand that the problem was really of a monetary standpoint? It was a financial issue, or the difficulty that you were having was not so much because the tow truck owners didn't want to do the work, it was really this financial aspect that was a problem?
Yes, so it became somewhat complicated between using the Emergencies Acts to compel the Emergency Act, to compel tow operators, and the indemnification. So we had the approximately 35 tow operators ready to go, but they were still, some of them were still expressing concerns about retaliation, their identity becoming known, damage that may occur to their properties or their vehicles, or to them personally, any harm that may come of them in the future for their assistance. But they still had committed to assisting. So being able to provide that indemnification was very useful. The other aspect was, although they had agreed to assist, there was some concern as we got closer to going operational that they could change their minds and not be willing to assist. So the ability to compel them would have also been of great advantage in that situation. We did provide the written documentation. We did provide the verbal notice as required under the Emergencies Act. However, they weren't resisting at that time. But had they changed their minds, we saw that as a significant advantage.
Merci.
Thank you. I'll keep going in the next round. Thank you.
Mr. Green, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I want to take this opportunity through you, Madam Chair, to Commissioner Carrick to clear the air on what seems to be a bit of a contradiction. During the March 24 SECU meeting, you shared that the Provincial Operation and Intelligence Bureau had identified the Freedom Convoy as a threat to national security. However, on October 19th, OPP Superintendent Pat Morris told the Commission that his team had never received credible information that the Freedom Convoy constituted a direct threat to national security. Do you agree with the assessment of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security that these statements are contradictory?
No, I do not agree that they're contradictory, and I think I went to a great extent to explain where there could be a perception of contradiction before the Commission. On the February the 7th...
I'm happy, I'll take that as your answer. I'm happy to give you an opportunity just to put on the record here today. In your opinion, did the Freedom Convoy constitute a threat of national security?
I believe the Freedom Convoy did present a threat to national security, and it is very important. This is talking from a strategic intelligence standpoint, not evidentiary as required under the CSIS Act or through terrorist charges under the Criminal Code, but from a strategic intelligence standpoint, which leads to decision-making and action planning, absolutely. I feel it presented
And would the
a threat.
Integrated Terrorism Assessment Center, would their national threat level at medium, given the definition that intelligence indicates that an individual or group within Canada has the intent and capability to commit an act of terrorism in Canada, and ITAC assesses that a violent act or terrorism could occur. Would that inform your intelligence and decision-making, operationally speaking?
Operationally speaking, that would inform decision-making, and there was consultation between what we call POI, Provincial Operational Intelligence Bureau, INSET, the Integrated National Security Enforcement Team of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and CSIS to further analyze what our section reported as a possible threat to national security.
There was in your Hendon report dated February 9th, 2022, it refers to threats to public safety, officer safety, and potentially to national security. Superintendent Morris noted that at certain times the environment was jovial and congenial. However, when police action occurred, the dynamic changed to be more aggressive. And around that time, the POIB had also become concerned about instances where information about police action became available to protesters. So did you share the concerns of Superintendent Morris, given that information?
Did I share the same concerns?
Correct, that police action information became available to protesters.
Yes, I shared those same concerns.
And there is evidence that you could perhaps, that accidental or intentional leakage of information and that you wanted to batten down the hatches, in his words. Do you agree that that was a threat that you needed to solve from your intelligence and operational perspectives?
It was certainly a risk that needed to be addressed and mitigated.
And what evidence, given the recent testimony of organizers that they had multiple leaks from every level, what do you have to say in terms of you said accidental or intentional? So what information would have led you to believe that there is an intentional leakage of information to the convoy protesters that would make you want to batten down the hatch?
So I have no evidence to say that there was leakage that took place during this time period. I'm agreeing with the sentiments and the statements that were made in the Hendon report at the time. There was a number of follow-up taskings that were issued out to try to determine whether the threats had actually been realized in terms of specific information.
Were you ever
leaked.
briefed on the potential for there to be perhaps sympathies within the Ottawa Police senior management, as has been reported broadly, that may have been a threat to the intelligence that had been shared? Or should I say more clearly, were you comfortable sharing all the information you had with the members of the Ottawa Police?
I had no concerns with sharing all of the intelligence we had with the Ottawa Police or any of our other policing partners.
Was there ever any information provided to you that some of the members may have been sympathetic to the causes and may have been involved in some of the leakages of information?
So there was ongoing concern that there may be police personnel. There were police personnel that were sympathetic to the causes, and there was a risk of information leaving the confines of police services.
And would that include the OPP as well?
That would include every police
And what are
service.
you doing then to investigate the potential for leaked information throughout the course of the convoy? Is this part of a post-mortem that you're engaged in?
So there's no ongoing investigation at this time. There was no evidence ever identified that there were any leaks coming from within the Ontario Provincial Police. That was followed up by POIB, and there was no evidence to substantiate that.
Thank you. Mr. Green, your time is up. And can I turn the chair to you?
You most certainly may. I will reset the clock, and you may begin. Madam Senator, you have 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Welcome again to both of you. Commissioner, I want to take you to the other end of the province because there's a lot of questions. We tend to be in this sort of Ottawa bubble here, but there were great concerns of what went on in Windsor, and I appreciate the position that you would be in terms of giving your support where and how you do it and how you police your own communities at the same time, and I think sometimes that's lost in terms of understanding of that. And so I'm quite interested in terms of how the decision was made to go into Windsor, how I'm familiar with the Police Services Act and their call for assistance coming. Can you explain that, how that compares to Ottawa? Because I think there's a lot of questions that people have around that here in Ottawa.
Yes, thank you, Senator. So in terms of the requests for assistance, they were both very similar. There had been requests for assistance come in from both police services, formally in writing. What was unique about both requests for assistance were they came into the Premier and the Solicitor General as opposed to coming into me directly. And the request for assistance would normally come from a police chief to the Commissioner, and then we would provide the necessary assistance. So that was was somewhat unique in both sets of circumstances. And they were public requests, which is something that normally we would not see, where the specific number of officers were requested publicly. In terms of providing the assistance, we connected directly with the involved police services and assigned operational level commanders to take the lead on providing the necessary assistance. In the case of Windsor, we were faced with a situation with a blockage of the Ambassador Bridge, where we had a window we felt we could move to enforcement after all negotiation attempts had exhausted themselves and execute a plan within 2 to 4 days. We had the available resources to meet the needs of the plan. Ottawa's plan was still evolving and developing, and we knew at the stage of that plan that we did not have immediate access to the necessary resources. The initial assessment was that we would require a minimum of 800 public order members, which meant moving public order assets from across Canada to satisfy that plan. We were concerned that action taken in any jurisdiction would then disperse activity around the province. On the day in question where we moved to positive action in Windsor, that was on February the 12th. We had 20 demonstrations going on simultaneously around the province. We were managing Highway 402, blockade, the Ambassador Bridge, attempts to block the Peace Bridge, a blockage at Cornwall, attempts in Fort Francis, and attempts on the provincial legislature in Toronto at Queen's Park. So my priority was to deal with all of those that we had the assets to, and then once that was done, we would be able to amass the necessary resources to deal with Ottawa as the plan continued to develop. But we continually sent assets to Ottawa during this period as well.
Okay, can you help me then understand, that makes perfect sense, given my familiarity with the organization. What I don't understand is why the request would have went to the Premier or the Solicitor General. Did it come from the Chief of Police or did it come from the Mayor and we'll have them here, but I'm trying to understand the differences because I get a lot of questions about that.
So in the case of Ottawa, the request went from the Mayor to the Premier and the Solicitor General. In the case of Windsor, it came under the signature of the Chief after consulting with the Mayor of Windsor. And I had then direct conversation with both chiefs to make sure that we were able to facilitate those requests for assistance. So although it was a nuance that I had never experienced before, it didn't create any obstacles for us operationalizing those requests.
Okay, and in the provincial emergency regulations that the Premier, the government put in place in Ontario, did you have input into those, and what assistance were they to you?
Yes, thank you. I did have input into those. Some meetings commenced on or about February the 10th, where I was able to provide some operational perspective and some guidance in terms of tools that I thought would be effective to immediately ending blockades and deterring and preventing further blockades. So I do believe that our ability to clear the blockage on Highway 402 was a direct result of being able to reference the consequences of those participants not clearing that blockade immediately. And I feel it was a very effective tool through our provincial liaison teams to prevent further blockades.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'll take the chair back. Thank you, Commissioner, and I'll move to Senator Cordy.
Thank you very much, and thank you both for being here today. It's very helpful. Can you characterize your level of concern? And this is follow-up to Mr. Green's, I almost said Senator Green, but Mr. Green's comments about the OPP and you know, I was surprised and disappointed when I saw pictures on TV of the police officers who were in charge of our safety putting their arms on the shoulders of the protesters and having their picture taken with them, and you know, have a good trip to Ottawa. Wish I could go with you. I was devastated to see those kinds of things, because you think that our police officers are upholding the peace, and instead they were encouraging, I felt watching, they were encouraging lawlessness by the members of the convoy. Did you have a reaction when you saw those kinds of things happening?
Yes, I did have a reaction when I saw those types of things happening, and I can tell you that there has been formal discipline administered in 15 occasions by me, 2 members of the Ontario Provincial Police. But I think it's also important to note that sometimes those images can be out of context. Sometimes when a police officer is deployed to a potentially dangerous situation, trying to de-escalate it, trying to build rapport, trying to get agreement for people to willfully leave what would be an unlawful occupation, there is some rapport building that goes on, which is different than making statements of we support what we're doing and we're behind you, but simply being caught in a photograph standing with somebody who's at the occupation may not be misconduct. I think we can't lose sight of the fact that there were people that were peacefully and lawfully protesting at various stages, intermixed with people who were engaged in unlawful activity.
And you're absolutely right. There were protesters, and we've all seen peaceful protesters, and there was lawlessness going on. So thank you for that. And yesterday we also heard about the tactical information being given, leaked is what it was being done to protesters. And you know what I heard, and it is what you said earlier, was that this leaking was being done by all 3 levels of policing. Have you done investigations into that within the OPP?
So I'm sorry, Senator, I'm not familiar with where that information came from yesterday.
I thought that it was at the commission yesterday.
So that may have been. I'm not in receipt of any evidence that there were leakages coming out of all 3 levels of law enforcement. If that means municipal, provincial, and federal, there's certainly been assertions and rumors of such.
Yes.
Through intelligence, we have sought to clarify any rumors, seek out any evidence, and there has been no evidence of any OPP officers being involved in any such conduct.
So you have been doing some internal investigations on that?
So we have sought to get additional information or evidence. We do not officially have an investigation underway. There is no evidence for us. There is no official complaint. There's no actual evidence. There's no starting point for such an investigation.
Are you concerned about the possibility of public mistrust in policing? Because when people see those kinds of things on TV, whether they're misconstrued or whether or not it's actually happened, are you nervous about public mistrust of policing levels?
I'm always concerned about the level of trust and confidence in our police from our public. It is absolutely essential to be effective and to ensure that citizens and communities feel safe and secure. They have to have confidence in our police. But in the absence of any evidence, a lot of this can continue to be rhetoric from those that were engaged in protest activity, those that continue to push out mis and disinformation to try to further a narrative. If there is ever any evidence or an actual complaint that can be followed up on through the course of investigation, you have my commitment that that would and will be done.
Because the mistrust also puts police officers in more danger, I believe, if there's mistrust of the police. So it really is important that it's dealt with.
Trust and confidence is absolutely
Yes.
essential to policing in a free and democratic society.
Thanks. Did the efforts to deal with the convoy improve after the former chief resigned in Ottawa?
Certainly a unified command was very clearly established on the 15th of February. So Chief Slowly resigned. I was not aware that he was going to be resigning on the 15th of February. He was engaged in a Police Services Board meeting. We had a number of questions that I was to take to Chief Slowly to determine obstacles that were perceived to be in the way of operationalizing the plan within Ottawa Police. Never had the opportunity to have that conversation with Chief Slowly when Interim Chief Bell was appointed, and the plan moved forward immediately at that point.
Time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, we have time to do 5 minutes, another 5-minute round, and we'll start with, that was for everyone, so I'll start with Mr. Motz.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner and Deputy, for being here. Commissioner, you've probably heard over the last significant period of time the distrust that the Canadian public has in Minister Blair and his perceived interference in the Nova Scotia mass shooting. And on the heels of that, if you will, we find a text from Commissioner Lucky to you on around February 22nd, just before the Emergencies Act or after the Emergencies Act was about to be done. She asked you, has Minister Blair hit you up for a letter of support for the Emergencies Act? And you said he has not, and should I expect to hear from him? I find it odd, don't you, that after the fact, we have a minister of the Crown seeking support from the police who they've been saying all along was supportive of this?
I certainly did not receive any inquiries from Minister Blair for any letter to support the invocation of the emergency.
Because you made it clear earlier in your testimony and at the commission that you didn't ask for the invocation.
I did not, and
Right.
post invocation, I did not receive any requests from any ministers or anyone from federal government to provide any sort of endorsement or letter.
So I'm going to take you back to some questioning from my colleague, Mr. Green, in regards to intelligence.
Yes.
And you used the word strategic intelligence. You do know that the threshold for the government's invocation of this, and that's not your responsibility, but the threats to national security. You came out on February 6th or 7th that indicated that I believe this is a national security threat. I don't know what happened on that day or those days that would have caused you to believe that, and I'm hopeful you will tell us that if you can. But that, it flies in the face of what Superintendent Morris has told the inquiry, that there is no credible intelligence to support the threat of a national security threat. And it's just like when you look at how the Act is written. Threats to the security of Canada has the meaning assigned under Section 2 of the CSIS Act. Mm-hmm. And did you see or were you aware of any intelligence that supported espionage or sabotage that is against Canada or detrimental to the interests of Canada?
So I just need to correct your one statement, sir. It was not I that on or about the 6th of February made any sort of declaration or statement about a threat to national security. It was on the 7th of February contained in a Hendon report, a possible threat to national security.
And you referred to that?
I referred to that. And that report is completed and approved by Superintendent Pat Morris. So
Right.
he would have had the same information
And yet,
at that date.
since then, he's said that there is no credible threat. That there was no credible threat to national security. He said that at the commission. So
He did, and again, a point of clarification. So that doesn't dismiss what was contained in
No,
the
I'm
Hendon
not-
report on the 7th, but as time went on, there was no credible threat determined. There was no threat
Right.
that became realized.
So you saw no again, to answer my question, you saw no evidence in the Hendon report or any other intelligence reports to suggest that there is any sabotage or espionage against the government of Canada or against Canada, period.
I did not assess that information in
But you didn't see
relation
any of
to the
those threats.
CSIS Act.
But you didn't see any threats that would meet that criteria, did you? In any of the reports?
I didn't weigh it against any criteria. I viewed that information, as I've indicated, as strategic
Right.
intelligence,
Okay, so-
a possible threat to
But
national
now
security.
you have hindsight, sir. You have hindsight. At the time, you still had to consider. So my question is, I'm just going through what the CSIS Act says is the security requirements to be a national threat.
Yes.
Did you see in those strategic assessments that there was a threat to espionage or sabotage to Canada?
You're asking me to look back at all the Hendon reports and did
No, I'm
I
asking
see
you,
that?
were you aware of it? Obviously, you either know you were or you weren't.
Yeah, I didn't see anything specific to sabotage or espionage.
Right. So were you aware of any foreign influenced activities within or related to Canada that would be detrimental to the interests of Canada?
There was reference to such things that needed further investigation, yes.
But nothing was confirmed. It was intel at the time.
Not to my
Raw
knowledge.
intel. Okay.
And I think we need to be clear on mandates here. So strategic intelligence that the OPP is providing is for our decision-making and our planning. That information is disseminated to CSIS, who is responsible for assessing it under the CSIS Act. That is not the responsibility as me of the Commissioner of the Ontario Provincial Police or the Ontario Provincial Police in general, nor do we have any assessment as to whether it meets the threshold of the Emergency Act.
Mr. Motz, I apologize, but your time is up.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Van Dyne, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be splitting my time with my colleague, Mr. Nakvi. Given the short amount of time, I am going to go quite quickly. Just to be clear, your testimony at the inquiry, and I am reading from the record, is to the effect that, in your opinion, you believed that the blockades posed a risk to national security. You stand by your testimony, sir?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. And you also testified earlier this evening that there were 20 demonstrations across the province, including the blockage of the international border between Ontario and the United States. With 20 demonstrations across the province, with everything going on, did the OPP have enough resources at the time in order to end the illegal blockades throughout Ontario?
That's a very complex answer. So to end the blockade simultaneously at one point in time on one day, that's not.
Respectfully,
Yes.
this is a blockade that went on for 3 weeks. So perhaps not all in one day, but over the course of 3 weeks, the demonstrations, the protests, the blockades were not successfully put to an end by the OPP.
So they were at various points in time. Yes, they were. They all were concluded successfully. We preserved life.
Ottawa
we
was
prevented
concluded
injury.
successfully only after the invocation of the Emergencies Act. Do you agree?
Timing-wise, yes, but the operational plan was written on February the 13th in the absence of the Emergencies Act.
And why did it take 3 weeks for a plan to be ready? February 13th is 3 weeks after the beginning of the blockades.
So that is a question that you'll have to ask of the Ottawa Police. They were the police of jurisdiction and responsible for the development of an operational
The
plan.
Solicitor General of Ontario believed that there was 1,500 OPP officers on the ground in Ottawa, whereas the Mayor of Ottawa said there were 50. How is it that there was such a breakdown of communication between the Ontario government and the OPP?
So the breakdown in communication is a result of administrative reporting that was done to the Ministry of Solicitor General. So if I am going to seek financial reimbursement from another police service, I have to have the approval of the Solicitor General. So the number of 1,500 came from a financial accounting. It was based on the average number of officers that were there on any given day over the number of days that they were there, which equated to the equivalent of 1,500 officers. At
But
that
on any
point in
given
time,
day-
there was not 1,500 officers there on any given day. On any given day across this province, I will only have approximately 1,100 police officers on duty spread across 330 municipalities.
Thank you, Mr. Nakfi.
Thank you very much. Commissioner, you've been asked that whether you asked for invocation of Emergencies Act, and you have said no. But you have also testified that the Emergencies Act was an extremely valuable tool. Do you stand by that testimony?
I believe there were tools available to us in the Emergencies Act that were valuable. And I think one of the things that should be looked at in the greater context is when the police do lay criminal charges in these types of situations, what are the outcomes of those charges throughout the judicial system, and how do they truly serve as a deterrent to future protests?
You've also testified, sir, that these tools made your word, our operation very effective, and in the absence of having those tools, we could have not have been as effective as we were. Is that still your assertion?
So that would be my opinion, as a combination of the tools that were available in the Emergencies Act and the provincial legislation. They both provided very valuable tools.
And you've also have testified that among the powers that you were able to use that were given to you under Emergencies Act were things like prohibiting people from attending designated areas, limiting the presence of children, which create a significant public safety risk, compelling service providers to assist with the removal of vehicles, and providing indemnification for those service providers, and freezing of accounts. Is it still your opinion that those specific powers under the Emergencies Act were useful and effective for you to end the occupation here in Ottawa and the blockades?
I do think that they are useful and effective tools. I can't say to what degree they assisted in ending the blockade, but I do believe they are effective tools that can be utilized by law enforcement in these types of situations and circumstances. And they were certainly tools that we could have relied upon in this particular situation.
But sir, you've testified in the past that these were effective tools that you were able to use as it related to the incidents that took over the 3 weeks period here in Ottawa and other borders.
Fair. Effective tools, necessary, I think is something that needs to be explored further. There were criminal laws, there were HTA, Highway Traffic Act laws that were available for some of those aspects, but yes, effective tools.
But we did not see those deployed here in Ottawa until the Emergencies Act was invoked. How is that then?
That is a situation of timing. The Emergencies Act was invoked prior to the operational plan being deployed.
So the occupation
Mr.
was...
Nakvi, your time is up. Sorry.
Thank you.
Madame Normanton, you have 5 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Once again, thank you, Commissioner Garrick. I'll get back to my line of questioning, but I have a couple of additional questions I'd like to start with. The plan that was created on the 13th, to your knowledge, was the government aware of the content of that plan when it decided to invoke the Emergency Measures Act?
I'm not aware of the government being familiar with the contents of the plan. Operational plans should not be shared with government. That's operational, and that certainly would never be shared with government.
Okay. Transport Canada, we heard a few days ago, had created a plan to move these trucks without having to resort to the Emergency Measures Act. This was a plan that was prepared by Transport Canada on the 13th of February. Were you aware of that plan?
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with a plan that was prepared by Transport Canada. I'm not sure if there's some confusion about the assistance that the Ministry of Transportation provided in the province of Ontario. There was also an offer from the U.S. Government, the state of Michigan, to provide tow services as it related to the Ambassador Bridge, approximately 100 tow trucks, which were not utilized. There may be some confusion there, or there may be a plan that was at works that I'm not aware of.
What matters is that you actually were not aware of it if there were a plan that were in existence. So let me keep going with the questions that I had initially. One of the issues you said with the tow trucks was that owners were worried about damage to their vehicles. They were concerned they may be identified. When the plan was to be implemented, they were worried perhaps they might not be indemnified for the damages. Would that have happened either way, whether or not there was the Emergency Measures Act in place?
So I'm not sure I completely understand the question, but if I take my best run at it, the Emergencies Act did help mitigate those concerns because we could provide indemnification to those service providers. So those concerns that they had prior to the Emergencies Act being invoked, we were able to mitigate those concerns with the Emergencies Act.
Okay, but with respect to damage sustained or to identify these individuals, the Emergency Measures Act would not have changed anything. There might have been damage. The individuals could have been identified even with the Emergency Measures Act in place.
Correct, and there have been no reports of such retaliation to my knowledge.
Merci.
Thank you. You mentioned the fact that these owners could have changed their minds. Did you have some leeway, though, as to the number of tow trucks you had identified and the fact that some could have, at some point, at the last minute, decide to say no?
So we did have contingency plans in place. We were briefed that with as little as 2 tow trucks and police officers that were qualified to operate the heavy tows, they could proceed with the removal of vehicles. However, it would have taken a substantial amount of more time to accomplish the same goal.
But it could have been done without the Emergency Measures Act in place, from what I gather.
Could have been done, but not as efficiently, not as effectively.
Considering the fact that the Emergency Measures Act has a threshold that is the necessity, did you meet that burden, that threshold?
So did we meet the threshold?
Was it necessary to use the Emergency Measures Act to go ahead with your plan?
It wasn't necessary for us to have the Emergencies Act to move forward. Whether the government meant the threshold to invoke the Emergencies Act, that's not something that I have assessed, nor am I qualified to have an opinion on.
Okay, but for your own plan, it wasn't necessary, from what I gather.
De votre point de vue.
From your perspective.
Not necessary, no.
Merci.
Thank you. Are there other legal means that were at the time considered by the OPP to have access to tow trucks? Was that part of the plan, for instance, to turn to the courts through injunctions to mobilize these tow trucks?
So we were actually partway through a request to the province for indemnification through a procurement process that we can rely upon in an emergency. So that was in process. We were able to discontinue that pursuit and leverage the Emergencies Act, which was much more efficient for us.
Thank you, Madame. Your time is up, and I'll go to Mr. Green. 5 minutes.
I'll go ahead and pick up from my friend from the block who halfway through. How long in your assessment would it have taken to get all the way through that in order to be operational for the plan that you had prior to the invocation?
Sorry, sir, can I get some clarification? Halfway through, I'm
you
a
were
little
halfway
lost.
through getting indemnified to get the tow trucks. That seemed to be the kind of final piece after the 3-week occupation. Like I'll put to you, sir, that it seems like your assertion, based on how I'm interpreting it, is that if you just had a little bit more time, you could have got the job done without the Emergency Act. So from a timing perspective, you said you were halfway through. Given your intended schedule on the operational plan, when would the operation have taken place?
The exact same time. The operation did not move forward any sooner because of the Emergencies Act.
So you would have moved forward without a full indemnification?
We would have moved forward with whatever indemnification we would have been able to get through the province. And if that did not satisfy the tow providers, then we would have had to rely on our contingency of using police officers to operate tow trucks.
And what would have been the risk there?
It would have taken us longer to accomplish our mission.
How much longer?
I can't say.
There was, I'm sure you were briefed on reports that the Ottawa police had a plan to displace people and then days before stopped the plan because of some internal dysfunction. What's the timing of that? Like in your briefs, when were you made aware that they had a plan and they called it off in the last second?
So I'm not sure that I'm familiar with specifically what you're referring to, a plan that was called off
To
in the
clear
last second.
Wellington Street.
So there had been a plan to take positive action to deploy public order to clear a section. There had been some discussion of that. That was dealt with at an operational level and did not proceed. That was not necessarily something that I was intimately involved in. At one point in time, on or around the 9th of February, and please don't hold me to the date, I'm going by memory, I did have conversation with Chief Slowly over concerns that were brought forward by our team about moving forward with a public order plan that they didn't feel we were ready to move forward on.
So I'll share this with you, that it's my assertion as somebody who was in opposition, who had information that was made publicly available to me through the media, like most of the public had. You've now asserted that at no point in time did the government have access to operational plans. Is it safe to say that given the fact that this had been an ongoing occupation for 3 weeks, that the government didn't have access to operational planning, that the invocation of the Act would have been based on the information that was made publicly available to them? Is that safe to say?
I don't know that I can say that. I have no idea.
Did you inform the government on any aspects of invoking the Act?
I did not inform the
Okay.
government on any aspects of invoking the Act.
So I guess we'll hear from others if they had, but at the time being, I would, taking your testimony at its face value, would say that, the government didn't have it. It's my assertion, I'll put it on the record, that I still haven't necessarily concluded that all of the legal tools were exhausted. However, there's a very serious practical matter, which is the OPS just failed to act for 3 weeks. That we heard testimony earlier today that they were given discretion on enforcing the law, which led to lawlessness. They took the discretion, which was, in my opinion, a distinction without a difference in terms of their ability to act and their failure to act or their willingness to act. And so, my question to you is that, did you have to contemplate scenarios where you just couldn't get cooperation on the ground to get things done, much in the same way that they had to call off their own action in the weeks prior to the invocation?
So I'm not clear on the actual question. I'm sorry.
The question is can you appreciate the public's perception that it wasn't necessarily a legal threshold, but a practical threshold, a failure of policing, sir, that the Ottawa Police failed to adequately plan for, execute, and provide operational law and order on the ground that ultimately led to the invocation of the Act, given that the government wasn't privy to your operational plans?
So I think failure of the Ottawa Police is very harsh terms.
There was a wrecking ball in front of the PMO's office.
These types of incidents, these types of events take methodical planning. They cannot be resolved overnight. This is one of time.
Can they be prevented, though, sir?
I don't believe that this could have been completely prevented. It could have been displaced and dispersed. There very likely still would have been unlawful assembly. It just not would have been in the area where it was contained to. It would have been in other areas of the city.
That's fair. Thank you.
Mr. Green, can I ask you to take the chair?
Sure can. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'm going to follow up on Mr. Green's line because this is a question for those of us who come to Ottawa every week continually to get is why 3 weeks? And I'm sure you get it, both of you get it regularly on this issue itself. And so I think this gives you an opportunity to help people understand the operations and the scale of the operations that's required. So there is certainly a perception, and going back to the Windsor situation, that it got some priority over the citizens of Ottawa from the provincial support, whatever that was, your agency, the province as well. So can you help us understand it both from the perspective of why Windsor would be the priority? I think you alluded to it, that it in what I would say was a surgical move to be able to clear that. Obviously, there were some economic reasons that were particular, but for those residents of Ottawa who were without work for 3 weeks because they couldn't seem to get to work and the Rideau Centre was shut down. And so it's a matter of scope, as you would appreciate, depending what you're losing out on from an income perspective. I know the auto workers, it would have been a big issue at Windsor. Yes. So can you help us understand it just so that people have a better understanding of how you tried to figure out how to balance all of that? And I appreciate it's not simple.
No, thank you. Thank you for that question, Senator. We are not in command and control of all of these events simultaneously as the Ontario Provincial Police. Yep. So each police service of jurisdiction is responsible for the development and execution of a plan within their respective jurisdiction. We were playing an informal leadership role because we were best positioned to coordinate the access to the necessary resources. We established, in cooperation with other police chiefs, what we referred to as a public order hub. So there are only 10 public order teams in the province of approximately 1,000 members, and they are part-time members, so they're not all ever available at one time. Every member on a public order line in a public order uniform is a frontline police officer out of the front seat of a police car and out of community. So it was a matter of trying to coordinate where everybody needed to be to mitigate what posed the greatest risk at the time and how we were prepared to move forward. We anticipated that Ottawa would be 5 to 10 days once a plan was developed and before we could have exhausted all opportunities and avenues of de-escalation, trying to reduce the footprint. So when you do move to the application of force, it is absolutely the minimal amount of force required to resolve the incident. We're bound by the Ontario use of force model, as you know, and de-escalation always has to be the top priority. Our integrated planning team, which was handpicked from around the province of subject matter experts, they arrived in Ottawa on the 9th. By the 11th, they had proposed a plan of action. By the 13th, that plan was accepted. By the 15th, it was confirmed that it was ready to be operationalized, and that it was still 3 days before all the assets were available and ready to go. So not a direct answer, but I'm hoping it sheds some light into how we were attempting to manage these.
It's helpful, but in a shorter version, can you compare that to Windsor? Because again, there was at least reported that 400 OPP officers were taken from Ottawa to Windsor. And so I think this gives you an opportunity to explain that.
Yes. There were no OPP officers moved from Ottawa to Windsor. there were not. On the 11th of February, we had approximately 150 OPP officers in Ottawa, give or take. By the 12th, we were well over 200. We maintained a presence of 200, building up to almost 1,000 over the course of the days. We did send OPP officers to Windsor to assist, but they were not taken from Ottawa. They were taken from other areas around the province. On the 10th of February, I initiated a provincial deployment, which meant we cleared out all administrative areas, many of our specialty areas, anything that was not critical to immediate officer or public safety was redeployed to the Freedom Convoy activities around the province, whether they be quick response teams at different border crossings, directly to Windsor, or directly to Ottawa.
Okay, I'm going to cut you because I have 4 seconds, but the point is that was the Freedom Convoy from one end of the province to the other that was causing that.
Correct.
Thank you. Okay, and I'll move to Senator Cordy.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I'm just wondering if there were lessons learned from various police departments, agencies who were in Ottawa about how they should respond to similar events. And going back to Senator Boniface's comment, like, I think a lot of people are saying, why 3 weeks? We all watched the convoy coming to Ottawa from all parts of Canada, and yet it just seemed to be, it just, like, 3 weeks is a long time when you're watching this day after day. And then we have police saying that, oh, well, we had everything ready to go, but the Emergency Act came out. And so we didn't really get to implement it. And if the Emergency Act hadn't come out, then we would have done it in the next day or two. But it had already been ongoing for 3 weeks, 3 weeks of torture for downtown Ottawa residents. So how do you, it's hard to explain to people how you were ready to go in 3 weeks plus 2 days without the Emergency Act. So how do you rationalize that to Canadians who are watching and say that we didn't need it or we did need it? We've heard the Ottawa Police Chief say that the Emergency Act certainly made it easier, and you inferred that also in your comments.
Thank you. I think I can try to be very clear in terms of my opinion on the Emergencies Act. Was it theoretically needed in law? No. Was it helpful? Were they tools that assisted the police? Yes. I think that's the best way I can summarize my opinion on the Emergencies Act. Whether it met the legal test or threshold, which I know is something that this committee is going to examine, that is something that extends beyond the police. But I think that's how best I can summarize it. In terms of the terms of what's being perceived as a delay, and I can very, very much imagine how frustrating it must have been for the residents of Ottawa. But I do ask Canadians, I ask them to look closely at civil disruption that has taken place around the globe and how police services have responded. And there have been serious injury, there has been death, there has been riot. We just need to look south of the border to see how a police response can turn on a dime. The timing is not ideal. The timing will never be ideal. If Ottawa police moved sooner and somebody was seriously injured or killed, we'd be at a different type of inquest or inquiry. So this was a no-win situation, I think, for the police and for the residents of Ottawa. And it is such a shame that there's so much attention on the action or perceived inaction of the police as opposed to the demonstrators and protesters who are the ones responsible for what victimized the city of Ottawa and this entire country.
That would definitely be a frustration, yes. Another question that I have, were the police concerned, and was there concern about the children? And Mr. Naqvi brought this up, the children who were there in unsafe situations, young children being put between the police and the protesters, at least one young child with frostbite, Ottawa temperatures in February, and children sleeping in vehicles, diesel fumes 24 hours a day, horns honking 24 hours a day. Was there concern about that? And I thought you said earlier that the Emergency Act at least restricted children within the zone. Was that correct?
So the Emergencies Act did restrict the presence of children within the zone. And again, not to overcomplicate it, but there is provincial legislation, there's federal legislation for endangering of children. I know that Ottawa Police did have the assistance of Child and Family Services and were attending to those issues, but that level of detail is not something that I would have as an assisting provincial police agency. Those level of details would really need to come from Ottawa Police.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, I think we've all agreed that we have a few minutes left, so we're going to go to a 3-minute round, and we'll begin with Mr. Brock.
Chair. Commissioner, it's been said that there has been a lot of misinformation, disinformation, and false information surrounding the group prior to arrival and while here. Do you agree with that statement?
Yes, I would agree with that statement.
And in fact, one of your employees, Superintendent Pat Morris, also agreed with that sentiment. In fact, he described political and media depictions of the convoy as hyperbole and sensationalized. And in fact, an example of that is the Prime Minister, who slurred convoy participants as a fringe minority that should not be tolerated. You're familiar with that language?
I have heard that language, yes.
Later called them misogynists, later called them racists. They should not be tolerated. Morris testified on the contrary at the commission that his unit determined participants had a multitude of grievances and appeared to be mostly ordinary citizens with a large degree of support across the country. Do you support that?
I certainly would defer to Superintendent Morris for his more in-depth analysis of who was comprised of the demonstrators.
Okay. And that whole sentiment I'm going to put to you, Commissioner, was echoed by Mr. Barry McKillop, Deputy Head of FinTrack. You're familiar with that individual?
I am familiar with Barry, yes.
He indicated at previous testimony at this committee that there was no evidence of any illegal funding of the convoy, that most donors seem to be ordinary people simply fed up with COVID restrictions. Do you accept that?
I accept that that was Barry's evidence.
Right. You'd agree with me that another example of dangers of misinformation occurred on February the 6th, where a downtown apartment dweller published a Twitter thread in which he described a pair of self-identified convoy protesters turned arsonists entering his building, taping up the door handles in the lobby, and then trying to burn the whole place down in a pyromaniac act of mass murder. Are you familiar with that particular incident?
I am not, sir, no.
This thread went viral, including from mainstream politicians and journalists. The actual man was arrested by the OPS, confirmed that the fire had absolutely nothing to do with the protesters, that the author had made it all up. But that didn't stop politicians and the media from exaggerating it, including members of this committee. In fact, former Mayor Watson jumped on the bandwagon, claiming that this event clearly demonstrates the malicious intent of the truckers' convoy. Journalists called it bone-chilling and horrifying. The NDP leader Jagmeet Singh and MP Charlie Angus cited the story as proof that the protester wanted to overthrow the government. The CBC radio invited the author of the hoax on its radio program. Former Minister.
Your time is up.
Thank you.
Ms. Bendayan, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The violence and even the arson that my colleague, Mr. Brock, refers to likely would not have occurred if we were not a city under siege here in Ottawa at the time. But Mr. Carrick, I would like to ask a question with respect to something you said earlier. You indicated that without the Emergencies Act, you would have probably had police officers operate tow trucks, and it would have taken longer, but you're not sure how long. And therefore, the Emergencies Act allowed for a quicker resolution of the situation, if I understand your testimony correctly.
No, I think maybe I have miscommunicated or you've misheard it. I did not say that it would have resulted in with the absence of the Emergencies Act. I did indicate that we had a contingency plan if we found ourselves in a position that the tow truck operators did refuse to provide the services we were asking them to provide.
And that contingency plan would have taken longer?
That contingency plan would have taken longer, yes.
And you also indicated in earlier testimony that you anticipated this blockade to last between 5 and 10 days, when in fact it lasted 3 weeks.
No, again, I'm sorry if you've misunderstood my testimony. I never indicated that the blockade or protest would last 5 to 10 days. We anticipated that it would take 5 to 10 days to execute an operational plan.
So then, why is it that you did not start earlier? The people of Ottawa were waiting for 3 weeks in order to regain access to their city and their freedoms. And I think everybody around this table has a trouble understanding why action appears to have only been taken around the weekend of 10 February.
So it's unfortunate that you have that perception. First and foremost, that I am not the head of the police service of jurisdiction. I have a provincial mandate to assist the police service of jurisdiction when asked to do so. We immediately provided assistance from the January 28th moving forward with providing the assets that were requested, from frontline officers to public order to critical incident commander to provincial liaison team members, in an escalating amount to the point where we actually got involved in assisting with the development of the operational plan. So those questions are best posed to the Ottawa Police, with all due respect.
So it's a failure of the Ottawa Police?
I did not say it was a failure of the Ottawa Police. I've already shared my sentiments on what a failure looks like. A failure would involve serious injury, potentially death, and severe damage to critical infrastructure.
Ambulances were not able to get to the hospital, sir. Cancer patients were not able to get treatment. There were incidences of violence on the streets of Ottawa, and people were afraid to leave their homes. Is that not enough?
Not enough for what?
Apparently not enough for you, sir. I fail to understand what you consider to rise to the level of violence or of importance.
So you didn't ask me about what rises to a level of importance or violence. You asked me if it was a failure of the Ottawa Police.
And
I do not agree that it is a failure of the Ottawa Police. They
because
were challenged,
nobody died?
They were stretched, they were at their capacity, they required assistance to resolve.
And you were not there? Okay.
We were there. We were there. Check the facts.
Madame Normandin, 3 minutes.
Commissaire Carrick.
Thank you, Commissioner Carrick. I'd like to ask you, in a general sense, how were communications between the OPP and the government, just an order of magnitude or a level between very bad to better to excellent?
Thank you. So we had no direct communication with the federal government. Save and except we did make available Inspector Baudouin, who leads our provincial liaison team, to provide some consultation to Federal Deputy Minister Rob Stewart. I do report to the Ministry of the Solicitor General at a provincial level. I have complete administrative and operational autonomy. However, I do have an obligation to provide situational awareness to the Deputy Solicitor General, which I did throughout the proceedings of the convoy.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Earlier on, you answered a question of mine saying that the government was unaware of the plan you set up on the 13th of February, correct?
I am not aware of government having any intimate knowledge of the plan on the 13th of February. Certainly no entities of government were provided with copies of that plan from the Ontario Provincial Police.
So when you mention that the Emergency Measures Act facilitated, for instance, the fact the ability to get the tow trucks, the government has no way of knowing the effect the Emergency Measures Act would have had on your plan because it was unaware of your plan.
I'm not certain what other consultations they undertook. I suspect they would certainly have been aware of the magnitude of the number of trucks that had to be towed, and there was lots of public commentary around the challenges that was posing for police. So it would be unfair for me to speculate what they knew and what they didn't know.
Okay, either way, they never asked you how the Emergency Measures Act could have helped you and whether it was needed.
Not me specifically, no.
Okay. Okay. And in a general sense, is there anything that leads you to believe that the government could have known what effect the Emergency Measures Act, what positive effect it would have had on any operation, in any, generally speaking, is our governments aware of planned operations?
Depending what consultation was undertaken and given the tools that were provided, I have to be of the belief that they were provided with some good guidance as it relates to tools that would be effective from a policing standpoint. Those tools that were provided, I do deem them as effective tools for law enforcement.
Okay. But the consultations didn't happen with you, from what I gather.
Not with me personally, no, but I can't speak to other consultations that may or may not have taken place.
Merci. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Green, 3 minutes.
Did you have any concerns about the sophistication of the supply chain as well as the infiltration of the movement by people who are high-ranking in Joint Task Force 2, the Prime Minister's security detail, and other military and former police services?
So in general terms, yes, I did have concern over reports of currently serving and or resigned or retired military and police personnel that were embedded into the convoy.
Is it safe to say that that type of knowledge, that intimate knowledge of police operations and tactics, would have provided a scenario where this particular occupation and movement was perhaps sometimes ahead of the game in terms of knowing what to expect next? And I referenced the ways in which they use jerry cans, which they use the baseball stadium as a logistics supply chain. Have you, in your experience, ever seen anything that sophisticated before?
I have never seen anything that appears to be that sophisticated. And just to be clear, there's no evidence of this. But I have a hard time accepting that it is merely a coincidence or circumstance that police got stretched across the two furthest points of the southern part of Ontario, Ottawa and Windsor. I don't think that was by happenstance.
It was
or
strategic
circumstance.
to stretch your services and to pull you into a bunch of different directions.
I have no evidence of that.
But I think it's a good, I mean, I would put.
Strategically?
Yeah, it makes sense. There was in a police report, in an intelligence assessment prepared by the Ottawa Police, a section in there about persons of interest that I drew attention to, because there's been a lot of consternation about the difference between charges for weapons and the presence or potential presence of weapons. And so let's talk a little bit about where, in my opinion, police did well. And that was in the persons of interest that were concerned to have access to firearms, some who made comments in open source that they intend to bring firearms, and in 2 cases, at least persons outside of Ottawa, and it said often outside of Ontario, have been met with police who seized firearms in the interest of public safety. When police services seize firearms in the interest of public safety, briefly, are charges laid?
They can be, but not always.
So even though charges weren't laid, that doesn't negate the fact that in 2 instances, there were people who you deemed to be, or not you, police services deemed to be a credible enough threat that they actually went and seized the weapons. Is that correct?
That would be my interpretation of it. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that specific report.
It's from a joint intelligence group, but it has been submitted.
Yes.
But you'll accept that testimony is what I'm reading in front of me?
Yes, I will.
Okay, and so understanding that, had they not have been seized, were there scenarios that you were prepared for that there could be armed factions with inside the Ottawa occupation?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Green, can I turn it back to you?
Sure can.
Thank you. Commissioner, I just wanted to go back to the strategic nature of what we would call the threat from one side of the province to the other. Was it your sense, given your vast experience on these issues, is it your sense that those were very well connected in terms of information and strategically planned accordingly?
I don't know that it was well planned as strategic as much as it was organic. I think there were various individuals that were emerging as leaders at various points throughout the Freedom Convoy. I think identified leaders very quickly lost control of other fractions within the group.
And when the convoy left after the operation, which again I commend your members for, there was a number of trucks that sat outside the city of Ottawa, which caused a lot of consternation to Ottawa citizens from the perspective of would they return. Can you tell me how long it took for those to finally leave and what type of monitoring you may or may not have been doing on that?
So we were monitoring those particular addresses of interest. There were a number of locations where trucks and individuals were congregating, and they were under our constant monitoring. I can't tell you off the top of my head the exact date, but it was a number of weeks before we were comfortable that that threat had been mitigated, those risks had been dealt with.
And I want to give you the last word on, there's a lot of question raised in terms of the trucks that came from various corners of Canada here, and questions raised certainly by many people as to why they couldn't have been stopped earlier, and given those would have come through your jurisdiction. Can you help the public understand what your powers would have been in those circumstances, and what your decisions were around that?
Yes, certainly. So as the convoy traveled throughout the province, police officers were really absent the lawful justification to stop them at any point in time. There were no reasonable and probable grounds to identify any particular individual was about to commit a criminal offense, which is a substantial threshold, as I'm sure Canadians would expect. Although there was lots of information on social media available, there was still the potential that it could be a lawful protest. So there were not the lawful grounds for officers to stop the convoy at any point prior to it arriving in Ottawa and getting closer to the point of having reasonable probable grounds to believe a criminal act may be committed.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'll take the chair back. That does conclude our evening, colleagues. Let me take this opportunity to thank the Commissioner and the Deputy for engaging in the last hour and a half. We appreciate you making the trip from the beautiful city of Orillia, and we'll call that an evening. Thank you.